Sounds good. I'll kick it off right now then. Let me just get this angle here. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tempe City Council work study session virtual meeting on Thursday, November 5th. The time is now 4:04 p.m. Due to concerns over exposure to the coronavirus, the city has implemented measures to protect our community, including the closing of council chambers and limiting public attendance to electronic means only. Members of the public may view the live meeting proceedings on Tempe Channel 11 or attend the meeting virtually through Cisco WebEx events by visiting www.tempe.gov/clerk for more information. The first item on the agenda is the call to the audience for issue review session items. Audience members have up to 3 minutes to address the City Council. Madam Clerk, were there any speaker or comment cards received?
None received for this meeting, Mayor.
Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go to item 2A, which is issue review session items. Item 2A is 2020/2021 federal principles. And I'm going to call upon Marge Zilla, I'm assuming, to make a presentation.
Hi, Mayor, council members, Marge Zilla, Government Relations Officer for the city. On item 2A, you'll find for your review Tempe's federal principles for the remainder of this year and continuing on into 2021. In the attachment to the memo, you'll see proposed principles regarding federal topics of interest to the city. And these principles will be the basis for Tempe's positions on federal policies, initiatives, and grants. Now, the principles are arranged in general categories, and those are followed by bullets that address more specific topics. And those include supporting human services programs, public safety resources, Tempe's transportation interests, and pursuing grants for support for areas that could include youth, education, sustainability, and resiliency opportunities. I also wanted to point out that, as it states in the memo, staff will be continually seeking direction from council throughout the year and informing council on the progress of legislation and giving updates on administrative actions and grant opportunities that could impact Tempe. And I'm available for any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Marge. Let me go here to see if any members of the council have any questions. Hold on one second here. All right, I don't see any hands at the moment, but does anyone have any questions?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I didn't get to the...
Not a problem, Councilman. Go ahead.
Yes, Marge, I wonder, I mean, I'm not sure when the issue of the big next phase of the HEROES Act might be passed and when that's going to be dealt with, whether it's in the lame duck session or whether in 2021. But I was hoping, I mean, that may be a specific piece of legislation, but just I think it's important to make the overall request that cities that are under 500,000 in population are attended to, whether it's COVID relief or other big relief bills that might be coming out in the next year.
Absolutely. Mayor, Councilmember Kuby, we have added an additional bullet specifically related to coronavirus relief and included in there direct funding to cities. So we would be able to, with this document, advocate for that direct funding and other resources, programs, supplies that would help mitigate the effects of COVID.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thanks.
And I assume it's also going to be renewed discussion, I would expect, or maybe not, about immigration reform and infrastructure and like a renewed focus on that. And those are both areas where our city and our state have great interest. So I expect that there may be a shift in that focus. So, but that's accurately reflected though in the federal principles, right? We talk about infrastructure and immigration, if I recall.
Correct. Infrastructure, the economic development components related to that. And then also if there are items that maybe are not anticipated in this, it certainly doesn't preclude staff from seeking council direction on more creative or out of the box policies that may come up through an administrative action or initiative or legislation.
Thank you so much, Marge.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Kuby. Any other members of council, any comments or questions? right, I'm not hearing any. Okay, going once, going twice, none. Marge, you are probably going to set the record for the shortest presentation of the evening, or the afternoon, I should say. But just once again, thank you for all the exceptional work that you do. We really appreciate it. And obviously, I'm sure if council members or myself have any questions following today, we will make sure to get a hold of you.
Perfect. And I can lead into the second item too, if you'd like.
Uh-oh, go for it.
Excellent. So item 2B, you'll find for your review Tempe's state legislative principles for 2021. So these will be the basis for Tempe's positions during the upcoming state legislative session, and that starts January 11th. These are also arranged in general categories, but they include the overarching policies of preserving local decision-making and preserving local resources. The bullets that follow those include specific topics like supporting human services resources, integrating the municipal perspective into water management decisions, and considering support for issues that could benefit our partners, which would include other municipalities and other entities. And again, staff will continually seek direction from council and update the council on progress of legislation that's happening at the state level that could impact Tempe. And I'm available for questions.
Great. Thank you again, Marge. Anyone else? Comments or questions from council? I see Councilmember Adams.
Yes, thank you, Corey. I wasn't sure if I even raised my hand, but that's great. So
I see the microphone come on and off, and I'm like, I kind of see what's going on here. So,
all right, very good detective work there. Anyway, I just want to say that, Marge, I really appreciate your help. You're such a good communicator, and you're doing such a great job. And the report is excellent, and just really value your work. And thank you for your services. So, keep up the great work, Marge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. Councilmember Cubie.
Thanks, Marge, and I'm hoping all this valuable information will be posted online where the public can see it, because I know we have quite a few members of the public that are really interested in following what happens in the state legislature and helps to advocate for legislation that's beneficial to Tempe.
Mayor, Councilmember Cubie, yes. So these principles themselves will take the place after this council direction. They'll take the place of the current federal and state legislative principles. So folks will be able to view those on the links they're familiar with. And then, yes, we will continue to provide those legislative updates with legislation that could have an impact on Tempe.
Thank you. And I know it's harder to have engagement in COVID times, but in the past, we have had events at the Capitol where we have neighbors, and we'll get like 20 or 30 people down to the legislature. But I'm assuming there'll be a virtual event where we could update our residents on issues that we think are going to come before the legislature, and also talk to them about ways that they can engage and weigh in on these issues.
Mayor, council member, very good point. So the legislature is still gearing up on all of the framework they're going to have as far as interacting with the public for this upcoming session that starts in January. We've been in communication with them about what events could look like. So we're staying tuned to what that will be rolled out as, so we can make sure that we have those opportunities there, either with physical distancing in person or virtually, or a combination of both.
Thank you so much, Marge.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Any other members of council, comments or questions for Marge? All right. Hearing none. Marge, looks like, once again, I don't know which was shorter, 2A or 2B, but pretty exceptional job, my friend.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Next up here, item 2C, which is the 2020 Community and Employee Survey results. I'm going to call upon Chris Tatham, who's our Executive Vice President of the ETC Institute, to make a presentation. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to introduce Chris Tatham really quick. Rosen Chastity, Director of Strategic Management and Diversity. I just wanted to share with the public and the mayor and council that we have been conducting the community survey since 2007 and the employee survey since 2016. So we have some wonderful, rich data trends that we are going to be sharing with you today. And I wanted to thank Chris Tatham because he is the executive president of the ETC Institute, and he always chooses to make these presentations with us in Tempe. He could always send someone else, but I really appreciate Chris taking the time to give us a special attention. I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Great, Mayor, members of the council, it's great to be back. For those of you who don't know me, my history with Tempe goes all the way back to 1997. You had just, I guess, finished building the Tempe Town Lake and we're getting ready to flood it, and you're doing a big Parks and Recreation master plan. So I helped survey what the needs of the community were then. I've since worked with the city on dozens of surveys over the years. The one that you see most frequently is the annual resident survey. We also do an employee survey every other year. So I'm going to kind of share both of those with you today. ETC, we're based in Kansas City. We actually do work all over the world, in Africa, Asia. We have several offices in the United States. We actually passed now the 1,000 city and county mark just this past year. And we now are approaching 2.5 million people surveyed. We're also now putting our data on our website so people can actually go and see who the top performers are in different categories, look at averages with everything related to COVID-19 issues, to library issues, you name it. We're letting folks take a look at it from our databases that we've compiled. As far as tonight, I'm just going to walk you through the results of the resident or the community survey, and then I'll walk you through some of the highlights of the employee survey. I can tell you this has probably been one of the most interesting years I've ever had, as we all know, with COVID-19, and it's been a major challenge for local governments. We've surveyed probably close to 200 communities over the past 6 to 8 months, and about 3 out of 4 are seeing real difficult circumstances. Ratings are down significantly. People are concerned about the futures of their communities, but there are some exceptions. And what I usually find in the exceptional communities is high regards for the local leaders, high regards for the community input process, and overall a positive view of the local governmental services and the value people get. And what we found at Tempe over the years is you've had all those. And so it's nice that I can report up front that the results of this year's survey, in spite of challenges, are actually pretty favorable. So let me start with the community survey. It's done annually, and it's used as an objective tool to really assess what residents think about city services, what they think about priorities, help you assess trends over time, which is one of the keys. We've seen the difficult recession that happened after the 2007 survey. I even go back with some communities to the impact that we saw back in 9/11 and 2001. Without a tool like this, sometimes it's hard to think or know what the average resident thinks. We did a survey just a couple years ago. I think I may have shared this with you last year, of over 4,000 U.S. residents. And we asked people, had you been to a public meeting, a city or council meeting or something like that in the previous year? And about 7% of the respondents said yes. We then followed up to see, was it really within the last year? And then when people really thought about it, it dropped to 3%. And when we then asked people why they went, about half went to get award or recognition for themselves or see somebody else get an award or recognition. And the second choice was people didn't like something that was happening in the city. And then the third, they wanted to change it. And what we found is most people want to know what's going on in their local government, but they're very unlikely to get engaged. And so without a tool like this, sometimes it's hard to know what the average resident thinks. So with that, this year's survey, the methodology is very similar to what we've done in previous years. Neighborhoods were a core priority when the survey was first developed, and so we developed it to make sure that each of the city's 8 character areas are well represented, because we used to do it more by zip code, but we found that there were core neighborhoods that were underrepresented. So the last several years, we've made sure that we complete at least 100 surveys in each of the city's 8 character areas. The samples then weighted by the relative population of each of those areas, so the overall results you actually see are weighted from that initial raw distribution. This year, the response was one of the best that we've ever had. We actually had, our goal was to complete 800 surveys. we actually had 1,153 responses. So really tremendous response from the community. But I do want to kind of emphasize that the results aren't perfect. The results have a margin of error of almost 3% at the 95% level of confidence. And what that means is if you see a result of 50%, it's probably somewhere between 47 and 53. And so there is a range of error there. And that's one of the things that people are seeing in all these national polls. And it's like, why can't the polls get it right? It's really hard to get it exact. But for a survey like this, where you're really trying to decide, well, what are the top priorities? How are we doing? Having a sample size of about 1,000 gives you a credible sample to really assess whether or not things have really changed and whether or not you're doing the right thing to meet those expectations. So as far as the survey results look, they're not perfect with the census, but each of the census categories that we look at, things like generally the race of respondents, the gender of respondents, and so forth, are very similar to the census. And what I mean by that, they're within the margin of error of the survey. We also look at things like renter versus homeowner, and we recognize that renters tend to be underrepresented. So we actually make sure that we get a significant number of renters. So you can actually look at the results from renters compared to homeowners. We do the same thing by age. And when we first developed the survey, one of the concerns was if you have 40 or 50,000 students at the university, would a quarter or more of your sample end up being students? So we make sure that we get a good sample from each age group to make sure all ages are represented. And this was because of the concern that we would actually underrepresent the needs of seniors in the community if we only had 10% or fewer of the respondents over 65. So we've done the survey very similar methodology each year to essentially preserve the trends from one year to another. We also this year have developed a dashboard, which I'll show you at the end of the presentation, that will really let you drill down into those individual results, because we don't want the needs of specific groups to be overlooked simply because I share the overall results of the survey. It's often important to look at the needs of subsegments or areas or specific demographic groups, and I'll show you some of those differences in just a little bit. This map just shows the location of respondents. We don't record the exact home address to make sure that we protect the respondents' confidentiality, but we do code the block address. In other words, if someone lives at 417 Main Street, we make sure we record 400 Main Street. For today's presentation, I'm going to be showing the results by census, by character area, where we're actually able to re-aggregate the data at any level. For example, we can do it by census block. We can do it by whatever planning areas you might have, because we actually have the data at the latitude and longitude coordinates. So if there are needs for other levels of geography, we can certainly provide that. With that said, here's the major findings. And I'm going to go through a lot of slides, but these are probably the two things, or the next slide will highlight the three things I really want to highlight. Number one, satisfaction with city services continues to be very high. You've heard this in the past. This was probably one of the best and biggest tests for the city, perhaps in history. And 81% of your residents are giving positive ratings. In fact, your overall satisfaction rating is 33% above the average we publish in our database, but we just finished a new sample of national survey results, which is being rolled out next month, and you're now actually 40% above that. So you're doing an incredible job in a very difficult time. In addition, of 43 areas we assess, you rank above the average in 41 of those areas. But a key part of our survey is to make sure that you're staying in tune with what the priorities from one year to the next are. And so police, your infrastructure with your sidewalks and streets and social and human services continue to be the highest priorities, and I'll show you the details in a little bit. Economic development, neighborhoods, and traffic delays are also important, but we found concerns about traffic have dropped rather significantly this year, not just in Tempe, but across the country, because there's so many fewer cars on the street because people are working at home. So those two slides highlight where we're headed. So the next few minutes, I'm going to just walk you through some of the things that we found. And I'm going to do it quickly, so if I miss something you're interested in, feel free to ask questions at the end. First thing I want to share are just some of the high-level perceptions that residents have of the city. We've developed a number of these questions over the years to really give you some strategic and also tactical indicators of how you're doing. One of the most important of these indicators is the one at the very top of the list, where it's the overall quality of services. You see it's over 80% of the respondents are very satisfied or satisfied. Only 4% give negative ratings. You're probably going to hear from a high percentage of the negatives relative to the positives, but put it in perspective that the ratio of positives to negative is over 20 to 1. In fact, the ratio of very positives or the very satisfied to negatives is 8 to 1. That's exceptionally high performance. In addition, when it looks at the issues related to information, whether it's about your city programs, about your solid waste services, your online services, just look at how high those are. That's a real challenge for most communities, is to keep their residents informed, and you're doing a great job. And your overall quality of customer service, you can see over 80% of the people responded gave positive ratings. In fact, if you look at this entire list, there's very little negativity. And I know a couple of you may zero in on the very bottom one, your ability to participate in city decision-making processes. 1 in 6 people gave negative ratings, but half actually gave positive ratings, and the percentage of people giving positive ratings is substantially above the national average. In addition, when you look at these and other charts, you'll notice that we have a gray area called neutral. These are not uninformed people. They are people who gave a rating of 3 on a 5-point scale. And the way you should interpret that is that those people's expectations are essentially being met. They're not really positive, they're not negative, but they knew enough or felt that they knew enough to rate the service. If they just didn't know, they said they did not know. So that's a 3 on a 5-point scale, which is an important rating. So all in all, there's very few people who are actually saying the city's missing the mark in any of these key areas.
Chris, quick thing. I don't want to interrupt you, but I see that Councilmember QB has a question. I want to make sure we.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Hi, Chris, thanks. I had a question about the survey design. It's across all these cities, so I can't imagine it would be different for one, but why do you have very satisfied and satisfied, but on the other scale, you don't have very dissatisfied and dissatisfied?
Great question. We actually do have it. You'll notice that dissatisfied has 1/2. So it's actually dissatisfied and very dissatisfied. The very dissatisfied level in Tempe is so small, it doesn't really show up on most of the charts. So we've combined it, but it is a even 5-point scale. A great question.
Very good. Thank you for the answer.
Okay, good deal. With that, I'll continue moving on to the next chart. Just so, and again, if there's something like that, please jump in so you don't, you are not bothering me. So the next few charts are about specific services, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to highlight a few things. The first one is, if those of you have been around a few years, you might remember there were some real challenges with trash collection, bulk waste pickup a few years ago, and those numbers really went down and declined. They're back on top. Your residential trash collection, your recycling services, you can see, are off the charts. Overall, percentage of people giving positive ratings is well over 80% in both areas. Your library, perceptions of quality of life, arts facility, I won't read this all to you, but even down to your bulky trash pickup removal, you can see now that the percentage of positives, people are giving an intense positive rating, or more than 30% that are very satisfied, is really great. You've got 36% now giving you the best rating possible, only 9% giving you negative ratings of either 1 or 2. In addition, as we work our way down, I'm presenting these to you in sequence from the best rating to the lowest rating based on the combined positives. You see again, your parks rate very, very well. You can see there's very little dissatisfaction in most of the areas that were assessed. Condition of neighborhoods is the one with the most dissatisfaction on this chart. 1 in 8 people gave negative ratings, but overall you can see the percentage of positive ratings is 70%. So again, most of the core services assessed with Parks and Recreation and some of the other items rated like they have in the past very well. As you work your way down, you'll start to see some of the areas where there is a little more dissatisfaction or more people giving ratings of 3s. You'll see, for example, down at the bottom of the chart, the quality of landscape maintenance along streets and sidewalks. 17% gave negative ratings, 59% gave positive ratings. And the reason I highlight that is there's only 2 areas that you rate below the national average, and that's one of the 2. You can see some of the other areas, street lighting, maintenance of privacy or private property, have a little bit more negative rating, but all of the items on this got positive ratings by nearly 6 out of 10 residents or more. The services that have the most concern are at the bottom of this list. You'll see then these are the last quarter of the services that were assessed, and you'll see that enforcement of alley maintenance codes, 30%, that's not a new finding. Condition of alleys near home for people who live there, also 30%. And then when it comes to condition of streets, is 27% giving negative ratings, and the city's efforts to enforce deteriorated landscape maintenance on residential property, 1 in 4 people gave negative ratings there. So when it comes to code enforcement, condition of your streets, and the alley maintenance, those are some of the areas that are rated lower. But again, you only have a couple items that have more than 25% of residents, which is kind of my standard historically, that are really concerned. But it does depend on individual services. For those of you who are just curious as to what the city looks like, I've got one map in the presentation, but I'm going to show you a link where you can map pretty much every question on the survey when I get to the end of the presentation. But I did want to highlight that the overall quality of city services is pretty much the same regardless of where residents live. You can see the character areas are all outlined in black, and the light blue shows that it doesn't matter where people live, the average resident in each of those areas is giving the same level of satisfied response. And so this is important because in a city like Tempe, where there's a lot of diversity, single family housing, mixed use housing, and things like that, it's very easy for one portion of the city to be very happy and another not. But this shows that the city's done a pretty good job of equitably meeting the expectations that residents have for city services throughout the entire city. So again, congratulations on that. As far as the trends—
Mr. Mayor? Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I have a question to that slide.
I'll back up.
Yes.
Thanks. I appreciate taking questions midway because then it's just so hard to go
absolutely.
back. So if there's not much diversity, geographic diversity, with the character areas anyway, and I understand that the character areas have sort of defined characteristics that make it valuable to do it that way, but if there's not that much geographic diversity, why not have more granular level and look at sub-census tracts and do it in that way, or make the census demographics the heavier weight, and make it align completely with the census, or at least with the geographic sense, just have it be more finely tuned, and then we could see geographic differences.
Well, you're asking great questions, because actually in a little bit I'm going to show you, just with the time that's available, that's already in our system for you to do. It's set up right now for character areas, but as I said up front, we actually have the latitude and longitude coordinates of pretty much all the respondents, so we can do the overlays at different levels. The key thing we want to do is just make sure there's a statistically significant sample from the area, because otherwise if you have too refined of an area, you might have 2 respondents from there, and that doesn't tell you that much. But as long as you typically have about 30 respondents from an area, that's statistically significant, and that is one of the things we can work with the city. So I'll show you some of the tools we have at the end just to help you address that issue, and if the city would like us to even take it to a more deeper level, happy to do that for the city.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay.
We're good.
Next thing is trends. Oh, is there another? All right.
Oh, you're all good. I apologize. Keep going.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. As far as trends, this year's generally been favorable. The overall, if you look at everything that was assessed on the survey, things got a little bit better. There were a few things that got a lot better, and what this chart just shows is the areas that improved the most. And I want to highlight long-term increases. They're walking and biking, local transit services, feelings of safety in neighborhoods and citywide, information, even your golf course. And when I first did this survey for you back in 2007, there were great concerns about safety. They've improved a lot, but I'm going to show you in a little bit, if we have time, we have seen over the last couple of years them decline a little bit in a couple areas. And so I think it's important to be able to look at the micro level detail as well, and I'll share that in just a little bit. I think one of the things that you should be really pleased as a leadership group is the improvements this year, because you made improvements in areas that many cities plummeted. I mean, I'm not talking a couple percent, I'm talking 20 to 30 to 40% decreases. Things like the accessibility and transparency of information was up 9% this year. The perception that people have access to campaign finance, lobby disclosures, just the openness of the city went up a lot. Perception of your call takers and their availability to answer questions, especially when you must have been overloaded with questions last spring, was up 10%. And even perceptions of your safety in desert parks at night, they were both during the day and night were up both. So a lot of areas that you made progress in that frankly were surprising to me during this period, because very few communities are getting better ratings for leadership unless their leadership has really earned the confidence of the community. When it comes to areas that have decreased long-term, your streets and infrastructure, you can see condition of major streets and neighborhood streets are both down 16 and 17% over the last decade or so. Landscape maintenance along streets and sidewalks used to be above the national average, is now below the national average. Overall quality of services is down, but nationally it's down by even more, and you're still setting the standard. And your library programs and services are down long term, but 3 of that 6 percentage points came just in the last year. If you look to the right side, you'll see that some of the areas that saw the decreases are probably some of your facilities that may have been closed for a time or for a lot of time during the pandemic. You can see the public library, the history museum, library programs. The other areas we saw some decreases are similar to what we're seeing nationally, as there's been a greater attention to human and social services and persons with disabilities and the needs of special groups over the last year. And so that could just show that expectations are rising for the performance of the city in those areas. When we look at how you stack up to other communities, this is a chart that every city we survey would covet and would definitely like. 41 of 43 areas you rate above the national average, but you don't just rate a little bit above. Remember, your margin of error is about 3% at the 95% level of confidence. So you're rating 15% above the national average is exceptional. And you'll notice the availability of information about city programs and services is 37% above the national average. Your pools, overall quality of services that I've already mentioned, your transit service, customer service. But the one I want to highlight tonight is leadership of city elected officials, 28% above the national average. That's incredible. Very few communities rate at that level. The other one I want to highlight for you is your overall value received for city taxes and fees. That's 23 points above the national average. So you're doing a lot of things really well, and you're doing some of the things that are most important among the best in the country. As far as things moving forward, though, I know I give you here's how well you're doing. Still paying attention to what the issues and priorities of our residents is a key to this assessment. One of the things that we ask people beyond just having them rate services is we ask them how important these services are to them and what the emphasis should be over the next couple of years. And you can see police services, not a surprise, at the top, 41%. Your streets were a distant second, but a strong second at 27%. And then social and human services, neighborhoods, and economic and business development sort of round out the top 5. And I've taken a look at how things changed over the last year, and this is one of the things I found interesting as far as what are emerging priorities. These are things that were significantly more important this year than last year. Sustaining priorities are things that are about the same level of importance this year as last year, and then fading priorities. And you can see that police was important last year, even more important this year. Streets and sidewalks have been important, even more important this year. Social and human services and just the general appearance of the city are also areas that rose importance. You know, appearance of the city is still 8th on the list overall, but it was more important. Police and streets and sidewalks have been in the top in the previous years. You'll see the traffic issues have faded, and that's pretty much happened just about everywhere across the country. Communities where traffic flow was the #1 issue have seen that it's not the #1 issue, at least right now. And it really depends on how behavior, particularly with working at home, how that changes over the next few years as to whether that will resume as being the top issue in many growing communities as it has been for the last few years. What ETC Institute does is we take not just the satisfaction, but we also take the priorities that residents placed on these services to kind of give you, here's the top things you should be emphasizing, both in what you communicate, so you're making sure residents know you own the issue and you're taking action on the issue, how you invest your resources, and even how you plan for the future. And you'll see when we did this analysis, The top three issues, sidewalks or condition of your infrastructure, is at the top. It's the second most important. So if you just ask residents what the top issue, they'll tell you police, but generally ratings for police are high at 74%. But you can see there's some lower rating for your condition of streets and sidewalks. That's why the opportunity for improvement is higher with that issue. Social and human services, you can see, again, is the fourth most important issue, but it's the third when it comes to satisfaction. And then you can see, or the third with the IS rating, 14th with regard to satisfaction. And then you can see economic and business development kind of round out the top issues. The items with an important satisfaction rating above 1, or 0.1, excuse me, those are items I always encourage communities to pay attention to. I've flagged the economic and business development because it's just below that threshold, and it was considered to be a high importance in the top 5 among your residents. This chart or table doesn't mean that fire services are not important, but what it means is that if you put a lot more investment in fire services, it's probably not really going to be noticed by the community, or could even be questioned by the community if it's done at the expense of other services. So if you see items that rank low on this list, but you know as leaders they're really important, it means you probably need to educate residents more about the reason that you're investing them, because right now they may not understand why those investments are needed. So with that, that brings us back to the summary I put up at the very beginning. Overall satisfaction extremely high, is down a little bit from where your historical high was, but it's still extremely well above the US average. And as I've told you several times now, that your overall performance compared to the US average, you're really setting the standard when you rank 41 out of 43 areas above the average. And you should be particularly pleased with the high ratings for city leadership, the high ratings for customer service, and the high ratings for how you deliver value. Because you don't get high ratings for value unless you've been really in touch with the community needs and the community perceives that you're investing in the things they care about. And in order to sustain that moving forward, continued emphasis on your streets and sidewalks, police, and social and human services, those are the areas I think will give you the biggest bang for your buck, which is why I identified them as your highest opportunities for improvement. With that said, that finishes the high level of review for the resident survey. The employee survey summary is shorter, so I may just go through that and then allow everyone to answer questions unless there's anything burning right now.
I was going to ask Chris, I actually see a couple of hands up before you go to the employee survey.
Sure.
I'm going to first go to Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor, very much. Much appreciated. Chris, great to see you again. Sorry you can't see me. You know, internet not so great over here right now. But I just want to say thank you so very much, because you've always been so great to Tempe, and it's really awesome that you have so much history with us. And, you know, I'm just really grateful for your work and really kind of understanding where we've been and, you know, where we are now. And I think some of the challenges that we faced along the way, but the opportunities in the future. And you've been, I mean, just this is just such a great tool for us. It's just so fantastic when it comes to the way that we look at our budget and what's important to our residents. I mean, it really does make all the difference in the world. So I just want to say thank you for that. A couple things though, I do want to ask, and obviously it's very interesting because this survey was done right in the middle of a pandemic. And I think a lot of people are looking at the city completely different. I mean, for myself, a couple of things that you mentioned in here that I think need some work is like the look of the sidewalks and some of the streets and stuff. Well, I caught myself when I couldn't go to the gym walking around my neighborhood. And so you have a tendency to notice some of those things a little bit more than you probably would when you're driving to work or doing things like that, or just going to the gym. But I think it's just really important that people care. You know, people care about the way their city looks. So I love that idea. I look forward for us being able to whittle that down to see where some of those challenge areas are, whether I think you talked about lighting, which has kind of been one of the things that's kind of always been on the radar a little bit. The look of our sidewalks, really important, but be able to do that overlay, I think is really important so we can focus on those key areas. So I think that's really fantastic. And the one thing is not necessarily to you, Chris, but I think what you've done is really solidify how great our employees are in the city of Tempe, because in the middle of a pandemic, I mean, they really worked so hard to maintain the level of services that our residents expect to keep our city the cleanest they can, the safest, and did everything right in the middle of kind of what we would like to call, somewhat organized chaos. But I think you bringing this information to us just really shows how much our employees care about this community and really want to do the best that they can. So I appreciate it. I love this tool. I think it's really great to be able to see that. The one thing I did notice, I gotta have one thing, right? So the one thing I was noticed when you look at the map of where all the feedback came from, I didn't notice any returns like right around the lake. And we have more people living on the lake now. And I'm just kind of wondering, is that just off a little bit, or is that an area we're not really hitting with some of those living structures that have, popped up around the lake over the years?
Yeah, part of that could be the nature of the people who live there. There are some segments of the population that basically don't respond well to surveys like this. So unless we do an effort to oversample and target specific groups, they may be somewhat underrepresented. That's not going to change your overall results because it's the margin of error of 3%. They're not going to account for that much. So that's part of the thing to consider, though, moving forward, if there are specific types and segments of the population you want to capture. And sometimes targeting a specific high rise or a specific group of people, which is, maybe 1,000 folks, but that's, less than 0.5% of the residents in the city. We try to make sure that we get good representation geographically through the character areas, but more can always be done. But it's always just a trade-off of resources versus the accuracy of the data. And I believe you can get a lot of good information at a fairly highly accurate level with what we do now. I'm happy to charge, 10 times and do all sorts of things, but I feel like you've got a good tool and try to give you the best value for that. And I think when you see the new tool, if I have time at the very end that I'll share with you, it'll really give you the opportunities to use the data better than you've ever even been able to use it in the past.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. And I think the idea of moving it up, and I want to thank, Rosa and Chelsea and her team for, really helping and working with you to make this happen, because it's perfect timing for our budget and making sure it does align with our strategic priorities. So grateful for you. And obviously you've kind of set the precedent. So I guess we'll expect to see you next year, Chris. All right. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Next up, Councilmember Garland.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, I am the newest council member. I've been a member of this council for 4 months now. I just want to tell you that looking through this survey was absolutely fascinating to me. All of the information that you got in there about our residents and what's important to them, and really making sure that our values are set up with their values. And I absolutely loved it. I have to say, I really enjoyed, again, being the new person on the block, that you have the trends. The trends page was really helpful to see what the last couple surveys look like. I really love that a lot. And I thought your maps were incredible, to go back and look through all of the maps and see where how people answer those questions in relation to the maps that you had. I thought was wonderful. So Chris, it's so nice to meet you. And I love the survey. So thank you so much.
Great. And thank you. And if, again, at the very end, I'll show you one of the map tools we have built in the dashboard actually lets you see the changes by character area over time. And you mentioned the trends, and it's really important. And one of the things I found in some of the most highly performing communities is they're able to pay attention to what's actually happening in different parts of the city. So, the overall result might go up 1%, but that could be a function of one area goes down 10%, another area goes up 10%. So it may not look like it changes much, but being in touch with what's happening at that local neighborhood level makes a huge difference. So we're going to try to help you do that even better in the future.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I just, Chris, truly do appreciate you coming in. I mean, this has been my, I don't know how long I've been on council, but a long time. And I do appreciate, you coming in, presenting to us, and really working with us in the city. And I tell you, ever since I've been on council, it's been extremely positive on how we've been running our city. And obviously for our council and for Tempe, we always take pride in, okay, we still have more to do. We still want to make things better. Obviously, when you spoke about the appearance and sidewalks and right-of-ways, that was like, man, that's the stuff I really want to take care of. Even though we might think we have some good stuff out there. I still think there's room for improvement in a variety of areas, and right-of-ways have been one of my passions. The appearance of the city, so to speak, and I love that we get a little feedback on those types of nuances along with other things that go on. But it just says that, you know, obvious we're doing a good job. Obvious we're going in the right direction. It's a great gauge for us as we go forward. I wish, you know, it's funny, I wish other cities could utilize this. I know there's several out there, even in our surrounding area, that I think would basically benefit from this. We do it every year. You know, I know some cities maybe do it every 5 years or, you know, 10 years, who knows? But we're investing in it, and we invest in this because it's a benefit to us to keep us on our track. It's our guide, so to speak, for the council members, so that we can go forward and really see what we need to tackle. But it's a testament to what you guys provide for us. For all the years, I've been appreciative of what the information has come up with, and really does tell us we're on the right track. So once again, just thank you for your time and effort, and appreciate you putting your time in Tempe, coming down, doing the presentation. That says a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Cubie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chris. Last year, I remember having a discussion about the comparable cities. I thought we gave some input, and I read through, you know, the materials, and I see there's a host of cities that we use as comparison. I think, if I'm not wrong, they range in population from 70,000 to over 100. But I'm wondering if our city, I mean, our city is unique, of course, we are a unique city, but we're focused on, we have a one of the largest public universities in the country, smack dab in the middle of our city. So I wonder if we shouldn't look to compare ourselves to other cities that have a large public university presence, and then also have a larger daytime population, not to look at, you know, but I just wonder whether we should be looking at populations over, you know, 150,000 that have large public universities that are more aligned to us, because a lot of the cities that were listed in the memo are southern cities, not even Southwest. There's a couple in the north in Iowa, but it didn't seem to really relate to the cities that I think that we think of as comparing to all the time. So I wonder if you could just, I have that question, I want to make some comments too, but if you could address that about comparable cities, because we did have that discussion last time, I recall.
Yeah, actually, since last year, it's on our website now. We've actually taken the data from 370, maybe 400 cities that have done the survey in the last 3 years. And all that data is now in our national database, and it's actually accessible online. So if you want to go in and find out who the best top 3 performers are in about 90 different areas, whether they're big or small, less than 100,000, more than 100,000, you can actually go to our website, click on our resident satisfaction dashboard, and see all sorts of information. We've also included in your dashboard this year that information, so you're able to look at it by a wide range of city sizes. So if you want to look at it at cities that are bigger than Tempe, if you want to look at it based on the ages of the people in the city, you know, I've done so many benchmarks and so many assessments of our data over the year. What I find out at the end of the day, when you get enough cities together, the benchmarks don't radically change that much. In other words, I've done comparisons because, you know, we probably have 30 to 40 large university cities in our database. And when I put them all together, they just end up looking like the average that we already have for the nation. And so it's really difficult if you're trying to say, here are the 10 cities we really want to match up against. That's probably something that we could do. I don't know if it would change the results that much. I've gone through this exercise probably a couple dozen times over the last 2 decades with various communities. And the more communities you add, the more it just becomes like the national average. So if there were just 5 other communities or just 10, it might be a little difference, but I doubt it. And then it comes down to who do you pick? And if you end up picking, like you pick in Austin, a whole lot bigger with a big giant university, but the city's substantially larger. Or do you pick a place like, you know, Lawrence or Auburn, you know, which are then smaller, but the university dominates. So you can always find that community, or if you, and we can do that for you. But I think if you use the benchmarks that are now available on your dashboard, you can do a lot of comparisons to other communities. And at the end of the day, you're performing in the top 10% of communities across the country. And what that means is who you compare yourself has to be the other top performers. And so otherwise, if you're just comparing yourselves to average university communities, that may not really keep you, it may make you feel too good. You know, you get comfortable with what you've accomplished rather than looking forward. So I'm always happy to work with staff and make those adjustments. And I appreciate your interest, because I know if you're interested in it, that means you're using the data. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And in the future, I would love to see, when we're looking at the comparable cities, to know that we're looking at comparable sort of university towns. That's a good.
And I think I might just add, it may be time for us to maybe update that list, because we've kind of kept it consistent. So again, part of it is the trends from year to year. And so that list of communities has been pretty constant. So you may have to say, well, the group we compare to ourselves should be a little different. But like I said, I think even if we mix it up, it probably won't change the results that much.
Whoops, I'm sorry, I got unmuted. Thank you, that's a really fair point. So when we look at the maps, a series of maps, we see basically a sea of blue, we'll see some yellow, and that's all interesting, but as we discussed before, looking at the geographic breakdown, if it's not at a granular level, to me, isn't that helpful and with thinking about public policy. But what really interests me is to look at areas of dissatisfaction and drill down. For example, question 6 on your slide, I think it showed 18. It had the most dissatisfaction and of 18%, and it was the ability to participate in the city decision making, right? So my questions would be, where is that sense present? Where is that geographically popping up? Because these maps tend to homogenize everything, right? So where is that present? Is it present in more different areas of the city? What about populations? Is it present more as younger people or older people? Is it present more in persons of color or communities of color? Like that to me is where we can really drill down and take a deeper dive into these layers and segments. And I know I've spoken with Rosa, and she is such a value to the city, because she's looking at, focus groups where we can sort of have residents co-develop solutions. We can identify problems using this data, not just use it as a, slapping ourselves on the back, like, aren't we doing wonderfully? But look at those areas of dissatisfaction and then dive deep, because we might find areas of the city that are not really satisfied at all, and we could attend to that. We should always be striving. And I'm really interested to hear from Rosa that we're thinking of adding equity to our performance measures. So we have a whole series of performance measures. I know you know about that. And it will, 74% approval of this issue or that. And to me, it'd be fascinating to have the ability to dive down and say, okay, how is this performance measure felt in La Victoria? That subcensus tract in Tempe, in Northeast Tempe, one of our oldest communities. How is that performance measure and with populations, but different areas? That to me is where we can delve deep, and we can use it to actually co-develop solutions with our neighbors. And I know that our public safety task force has they've looked at the community survey, and they feel strongly that we need to be some different questions too. And I believe putting that equity lens and into our mapping and into our questions can really help to get at this co-development of solutions with different communities. So that's my commentary. Just wanted to get that out. And I realize we have to represent all ages. We want to know what our seniors are feeling, even if they're not as representative as an 18 to 34-year-old, which is the dominant, it's 54% of our citizens, I think, fall in that age group. But we recognize the census counts students here, and we get money because we have those students. So we really do need to tune in to students. And even though they come and go and they're more transient, they're representative of a group of people that remain here and have some similar interests. So that's my commentary, but I wanted to ask whether council would be receptive to a few things. One is, we are such an open data city. Bloomberg has prized our openness and our transparency. I discussed this with Rosa, but I'm hoping that we can publish the raw data for ASU researchers, for students, for residents who I think might really want to get into that raw data and play around with it. And that we could also share the dashboard with the Neighborhood Advisory Commission, other commissions who can use it to drill down and make the survey even more useful. Like, for example, the Transportation Commission could say, we want to look at where traffic issues are more problematic, and that might help them when they're reviewing certain issues that come before them to advise us. So I'm hoping that we can get approval to publish the raw data and make that accessible, because that would be in keeping with our open data. And then I'm also interested in having, if it's possible at some point in the future, to have a partnership with the Decision Theater at ASU, so we could view this data in a drum, in an immersive environment where we can sort of play around with levers and just be able to see in a really visually captivating way areas of the city where we have issues or don't have issues. So hoping that we'd have an approval just to make the data part of our open data platforms.
Mayor and Councilmember Kuby, thank you for the questions. And absolutely, equity, as we know, is first and foremost for our city. And I believe this topic came up at the last presentation last year at the museum when we were presenting the survey findings. And we went to work right away. We worked with Chris Tatham and his team, his awesome team of analytics, data analytics folks. And he shared that he was developing this tool. And actually, he said, you may be one of the first cities that actually uses this. So we even went to work with them on tailoring the colors to our branding colors in the city of Tempe. So Chris is going to take a few minutes to share with you exactly how we plan to use this to get us into those neighborhoods by block. So we're not identifying anyone by address, but more importantly, from that equity lens, making sure that we look at the census areas and the overlay of poverty. So really, I'm going to leave it to Chris to share, but the data discussion regarding open data. So 5 years ago, when we started strategic planning, Mayor Bloomberg was instrumental as far as his best practices that he shared with his think tank of folks that flew out and helped us. One thing that we did as a companion piece to creating performance measure was understanding the importance and the power of the council adopting an open data policy and really being committed to an open data source for our community, and understanding that that reduces the public information requests that we do get for our staff. That's a lot of work. So the more data we place out in the community, the better. So the simple answer to that question is it's already up on the data.tempe.gov, the raw data, so our community has access to it, and we take it actually one step further. If they have questions regarding that, we sit down with them and analyze alongside them, and this is the information that we're also sharing with our staff and our employees as we start the budget. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Sure, and Mayor, I don't know if there's other people asking questions. I'm happy to do just a brief overview. It kind of tied in with the comments on the mapping, if you'd like me to, or I can wait for questions.
I was going to say the only other hand I think we had was Councilmember Adams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, would you like me to go, or do you?
Sure, or if you'd like to defer, that's fine as well.
No, I mean, I would like to say a few things.
Please, go for it.
If I may. First of all, thanks, Chris. It's good to see you again. I've watched you for years present, and it's always a pleasure to see you. I agree with Councilmember Navarro on improving our right-of-ways, and so I just want to continue to work on that as a city. I field complaints regularly about our right-of-ways, so if we can just keep making that a high priority, and I think we've already been putting it towards the top of our list. So just if we can just keep doing that. Our residents also continue to express their wishes for improving our streets and sidewalks, and believe we need to keep that as another one of our focuses. And so I know Shelley Seiler's doing a great job, and I know the funding's been tight, but if we can just keep on working on it, that would be great. And I also want to thanks to all of our employees who participated in this survey. And I just have a question on is the number of employees that participated, is that an average number for other cities too, or is it below average or above average? Just kind of wanted to ask you that, Chris.
It's actually about average. So most communities, we get about 40 to 50% to participate. There's very few that will get 70%. But usually about 40 to 50% is what we normally get. It's actually been a little lower this year, and part of that's because many employees are working from home, and so that kind of day-to-day oversight of a supervisor encouraging you and saying, hey, have you done your survey? Doing that remotely has been a little less effective. But all in all, the results of the employee survey were very representative of the city as a whole. And I'll share those in just a moment.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and because I wasn't sure where we were on it, and I just, maybe we could in the future work with our employees and try to motivate them. I don't know how we would do that, but to fill out the surveys, because I just think that's such a valuable tool to do. So maybe Andrew, I'd maybe ask you in the future to look at how we can even improve those numbers even more. And I just think you did a great job, Chris. It was very informative, and thanks so much for your services.
Sure. And Mayor, I would just.
Councilmember Adams.
Okay.
Chris, if you want to go forward, go forward.
Great. I'm going to just do this real quickly because I know you have other agenda items. This is your dashboard. You can come in here, and if you want to take a look at the overall results of anything on the survey, you can just dive right in. You get the survey categories up top. I'm just going to kind of do the overall kind of satisfaction with different safety services. And you can then see the results here below, the blue versus down to the purple colors. And then if you want to end up looking at some of the specifics, what I like is you can come over here to the demographics. I know you've been interested in what do people think about different issues. And so if you come here and you pick, for example, satisfaction with safety issues, and then we pull down issues related, let's say, police department. What you can do now is you can actually look at how every group, these are all your racial groups, really not a lot of significant differences. Asians were the lowest at 64%. You can see white, non-Hispanic, we're at 78%. So there are some differences, but not radical differences. But what we found is the group that was really dissatisfied is your 18 to 34. Compared to the rest of the city, that's actually where you see some of the biggest dissatisfaction in this survey. So that need to understand what that group is now, the younger group and what they're thinking. And I heard someone make the comment about the university is very important. You can use this data now to go and look at each of these specific groups to either validate or invalidate some assumptions about whether or not certain groups might think certain ways. And so hopefully this will be a great tool for you. You're also going to be able to use it for doing much more detailed mapping analysis. This question here just shows how safe people feel overall in the city. And you can see the dark blue down here. These are people who are given the highest possible ratings. The lighter blue is still very good, but you can see in the north it's a little bit lower. You can see here the satisfaction is just 67%. Here in Apache, 67%, but it's 83% down south. You can also see it over here by each of the character areas. And if for some reason there really was a need for the city to do lower levels of geography, we can work with you to do that. One of the tools I like the most is the change over time. This is the same information. This is the safe and secure communities, overall feeling and safety. Overall satisfaction with safety went up 2% from last year to this year. You can see 76 to 78. It's rounded up just a little bit. But what you'll notice is it didn't change the same in each of the character areas. For example, North Apache, even though it's the lowest rated, actually got even safer. So compared to a year ago, Apache's moving in the right direction. But up here in North Tempe, it was one of the lower ones that actually went lower from a year ago. And so you can see for every question on the survey, you can pull up year on year and see how things have changed. And I won't do that all for you now. In addition, if you want to look at the benchmarking data, you can now look at it all sorts of levels. You can look at it nationally. You can look at it regionally. You can look at it based on the size of all sorts of different other cities. You can even look at it by the age of respondents. So there's a tremendous amount of data here. We're going to continue working with your staff so that way you're able to use it in your decision-making processes. The last thing, Mayor. Sorry, Mayor.
Sorry, no, sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. One quick thing. Councilmember QB's hand is up as well.
Okay.
Thank you. I guess I had coffee today, so I'm full of questions. But this is less a question for you, Chris, than for Rosa. But I know that our Tempe PD has launched a new technology with a company called Elucid, and it's meant to help us understand and measure key aspects of community sentiment about policing. And they're going to be asking residents for feedback about public safety and issues that matter to them. And they can collect the data monthly, but they can also collect it on an as-needed basis to get impressions about a specific incident that has happened or address a specific issue. And they commit that they use the census demographic data to reflect across race, age, sex, income level, education, all that. And so I'm wondering how, and this is a question more for Rosa. So how are we going to integrate our community survey with the Elucid survey? Is that a platform that will be sort of integrated? I know we're going to hear more about it in the future, but is there a general answer I could have?
Right. So thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Kuby. So actually, the raw data has already been distributed to the Sparks Center from the police department. And so that means they're already starting to look and analyzing this data. What we are now in this coming year is looking at helping our workforce have all the tools available to them, but understanding how that all integrates to the intersectionality of every survey and what that tells us, because every bit of data paints a better picture of perhaps giving us clues on how to serve our community a little bit better. So Chief Glover and I have already talked about that. We had a meeting with IT, Mark Wittenberg and his team regarding what we need to do next regarding kind of bringing those surveys together. So thank you for the question. And yes, the intersectionality of all this information and data is imperative.
Thank you, Rosa, because I know from initial conversations with the Public Safety Advisory Task Force, there was a lot of comment about the questions in the community survey not drilling down into a lot of the attitudes about policing, and they didn't feel like the questions were designed in a way to get that. And they weren't really aimed at that, but I think this is going to be a really valuable tool to use in the future. So thank you so much for getting that off the ground, you and the PD.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris, I think there's no other questions, so feel free to keep going.
All right, I'll finish up with the employee survey. So as you know, we do the employee survey about every 2 years, and I just want to give you some of the highlights. I think several members of the council have already acknowledged what a great workforce you have, and truly you don't get those satisfaction ratings we're seeing on the resident survey unless you have employees who are responsive and caring to resident needs. And one of the things I think is really great on this survey is just the pride your employees have. 95% of them said that they were proud to work for the city of Tempe, and you can see that's been consistent, has not changed over the last couple years. So that's a real great indicator. In addition, the percentage of employees that indicated that they're very satisfied or satisfied with their job is 86%, almost 9 out of 10. Nationally, it's 66%. So it's kind of like your employee satisfaction mirrors your resident satisfaction with regard to national averages. Your employees are much more satisfied as well. In addition, when we asked whether or not they'd recommend the city as a place to work to a friend or relative, you can see overall 89% said yes. It's been about the same the last couple years. That compares to 78% nationally for governmental employees. So again, you're 11% above in that regard. And then the last data I'll share with you is just whether or not people would like to finish their career with the city. And I find this tremendous. I wish I had 95% of my employees want to finish their career with ETC Institute. I shoot for about 90% because that just means that people you invest training in, people you invest time, intellectual capital is going to stay with you. And right now, 19 out of 20 of your employees want to stay with the city. So that's just terrific. So some of the conclusions from the employee survey, in addition to just the overall high ratings I just shared with you, were the identification of some opportunities for improvement. And one of the things, just to make sure that even though employees give input, sometimes they don't always believe their input matters. So encouraging management to close the loop. So a lot of times you get ideas, but let employees know how those ideas are used. Resolving poor job performance or dealing with conflicts in the workplace more effectively. Those were two other issues that were identified. Of course, communication comes up in almost every employee survey that we do. But the last one here is just really making sure exceptional job performance is recognized. And when you have a really good organization where people work really hard, they like their jobs, and they feel like their organization is a great place to be, sometimes you take for granted that everybody does a really great job, or it becomes even harder to identify exceptional job performance. But it's important not to miss that, because if you don't identify the exceptional job performance, what happens is mediocre performance can replace it as the standard. And so making sure that continues to happen will help ensure that employees continue to do exceptional jobs when they're asked to, or even if they just step up and volunteer like many of them did during the pandemic. So I know, Mayor, we've already gone through questions, and I know I've been talking for quite a while. So I'm finally at my question slide if there are any others.
Well, thank you, Chris, and good for you. We actually have Councilmember Garland with the question.
I'm not sure much of a question as a statement. I think the question is, going through my notes and looking through the survey, that I look at that 48% of employees that participated, and wow, I would really love to have more employees participate in this survey. I think it would be so helpful, and I would love to encourage any way that we can do that through our city manager or department heads to be able to find ways to be able to get that 48% up. The other thing I just wanted to say, I really appreciated reading the raw data, the comments on at the end of the survey, being able to see how raw and honest people were with the comments that they left, I thought were very, very helpful. I just want to tell you, I really appreciated that. So thank you again, Chris.
Good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Let's see here. Any other comments or questions for Chris? Looks like I'm not hearing any. Just wanted to say, just on my own side, I haven't said anything during the presentation, but just, Chris, thank you again for all of your work. And I appreciate your collaboration working with Rosa and all the staff here at the City of Tempe. It's exceptional data. I remember working with you when I was a member of the council, but now I'm happy to be back as mayor, continuing to work with you to just appreciate everything you're doing and all the great data and the institutional memory, frankly, that you're bringing to this process. It's exceptionally helpful as we all try to make just high quality decisions for the residents of the City of Tempe. So thank you very much for everything. We really appreciate a great presentation.
Great. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, let's see here. Next up here, we have item number 2D, which is the long range forecast update. And I'm going to call upon staff to make a presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. This is Ken Jones, Deputy City Manager, Chief Financial Officer, and Mark Day and I are going to be making this presentation this afternoon to launch into the long-range forecast. Mark, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mark Day, Municipal Budget Director.
So Mark is going to kick off the presentation, but I just want to say, Mayor and Council, that this long-range forecast this year is a little different than most years. This has always been provided in November, but we usually view it as more of a kickoff to the budget session and establishing those initial parameters for our upcoming budget. This year, we're treating this more like a financial update with a lot of information that we're waiting for. And we'll get into the details of that, but just to kick us off here, I would say that we aren't looking for any decisions tonight. What we're looking for is whether you agree with the approach that we're taking to view financial ramifications to the city and to give you an update on the economic conditions. So with that, Mark, if you'll kick it off. Mark, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Are you there, Mark?
Maybe Mark's just trying to say the budget is exceptional and we're good.
Alex, does Mark need to be unmuted or is that him?
He has full control. I can go ahead and attempt to unmute him now.
Okay. There we go.
Yesterday.
Thank you, Alex. I couldn't figure out how to do that. So sorry about that. So the long-range financial forecast is an integral part of providing assurances on the financial stability of the city and aligns with City Council's strategic priority number 5, financial stability and vitality. The forecast is an integral part of the strategies for achieving performance measures 5.04 and 5.05. So your packet contains some detailed assumptions that were used to develop the long-range forecast, and we're just going to highlight a few of those here. So first of all, economic conditions are very much in flux with a lot of uncertainty about the long-term economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. and the potential for a resurgence of an outbreak and the pace of recovery from the pandemic. Even among economists, there's a lack of consensus about the duration of the economic impacts from the pandemic and then the speed of recovery. So here at the city, we use historical data and trend analysis, as well as data from a variety of sources, including the Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona, to assist in developing the forecast. But due to uncertainty, there is a potential for a wide margin of error in our revenue projections in the forecast. So when we come back in February of 21, we're going to have an updated forecast and we'll have some more data and we'll be able to refine our projections. The second assumption is the forecast does assume continued movement through with the employees through salary plans and market adjustments. And then the forecast does not assume any additional federal COVID assistance. I know there's a lot of discussion about that at the federal level, but the forecast at this point does not assume that. Some recent impacts that have impacted the forecast. The CARES Act reimbursement from the state of Arizona for reimbursement of public safety payroll costs was deposited in the general fund. That was $22.5 million. The forecast does reflect the allocation of $7.8 million in general fund monies that was allocated to the 22 COVID recovery initiatives. The federal CARES Act, which provided $1.8 trillion in direct aid to individuals and businesses across the country, which is one of the largest stimulus packages in U.S. history, has boosted the economy over the last several years, and that's reflected in some of our revenue numbers. And although some sectors are showing signs of recovery since the pandemic, our restaurant, bars, and hotels are still significantly reduced in their sales from the same period as last year. And then lastly, some recent increases to healthcare premiums sponsored by ASRS will cause larger than anticipated increases to the city's contribution towards retiree healthcare.
So council members, now I'd like to delve into some of the specifics affecting the general fund and why there's so much volatility in the revenue projections that we have, and talk about some of the things that have impacted it recently. So the good news is our fund balance is still above policy, and we still have the intent of spending that down to within policy over a brief period of time, and that the budget reductions that were made last year and approved by the city council actually provide us this flexibility to be able to do this over a period of time. So we're going to refine these projections in February, but I want to delve into them a little bit tonight and talk about some of the things affecting it. Next slide, please. So these are some of the privilege tax trends that we're showing you so that you can see why we're reluctant to establish parameters currently. The left vertical axis is an axis that represents the orange, which is privilege tax from restaurants, and the green, which is privilege tax from hotels. Those relate to the axis on the left. So you can see that $1 million or up to $1.8 million. The vertical axis on the right that goes up to $12 million is all total privilege tax that comes into the city. But you can see that the blue, which is all general fund privilege tax, sales tax, we refer to sales tax, you can see that the dip that we saw there is also shown in restaurant activity and hotel activity. The unusual thing about this trend is that the sharp increase in revenues, both total and general fund, to some extent in restaurant, and to a lesser extent in hotel, is what troubles us. If that were a trend that we could depend upon, then you would say we are beginning an upward trend and recovering from the economic impacts of the pandemic. But in fact, we believe that it reflects some of the federal intervention in the form of stimulus payments directly to individuals, in the form of unemployment benefits, contributing, adding on to the state benefits, and also some of the other federal stimulus that was paid directly in the form of CARES Act funding. So what we don't know is that going to be a continuing trend, or is what we see here in the blue and the orange the beginning of a decline again in the economy, what we expect to see in the future? So what we don't know, we have, several outstanding questions here. Does a recent uptick in economic recovery lead to higher revenue projections? Is there additional federal assistance coming? What are the long-term effects of job losses and evictions without federal assistance if that doesn't happen? And locally, we're curious about what is ASU going to do in terms of on-campus versus distance learning. So all of those are things that we would like more information on, and we will wait until February to give you parameters for next year's budget. Next slide, please. So we always show you this general fund model, which is revenues and expenditures in the left chart, general fund balance in the right chart, and what the scenarios are that would keep us within policy. This is our base general fund scenario, which is based on the economic models that we've always used. The problem is these economic models don't account for federal intervention and stimulus and those things that we have experienced recently. So, but you can see that if we used those models that we've used in the past, and this is what we're calling our base scenario, and if we had to make our best guess today, this might be it. And what I have highlighted in the yellow is, you can see this is in thousands of dollars, by the way, so you have to add 3 zeros. But what you see here is there would actually be some capacity for adding $1 million in the upcoming fiscal year and $1 million in the year after that, and starting to improve our general fund budget. So this would be the base scenario if we believed that the current economic models represented what's actually happening. If we go to the next slide, this shows what happens if the revenue is lower than what the economic models are projecting. And you can see in order to stay within fund balance, and we have projected to stay within fund balance policy here, we would be making additional cuts, $500,000 in 21-22, $3 million in 22-23, another $3 million in each of the next years. So these low revenue scenarios show a very depressing budget cutting going forward. If we look at a potential high revenue in the next slide and said, it could be much better than what our base model is showing. And in this case, what we're showing is significant additions to our budget, $5 million in the first year, 3, 2, and 2 in subsequent years. So what we're saying at this point is we believe we can establish these parameters now, but to point to one of these or somewhere in between these models and say, this is what we think is actually going to happen, we will be willing to do that in February after we collect a couple more months of sales tax data, after the federal stimulus has run out, after the federal unemployment assistance has run out. So we'll be back to you in February and kind of settle on what we think the most likely scenario is. And I'll just tell you that when we come back in February, it's very likely that we might propose a budget for next year that includes large contingencies, so that we would say, let's not authorize budget expenditures today that might doom us in the future. Let's instead authorize budget contingencies that if things get better, we can distribute to the departments as the year goes on. So that's the reality that we're facing next year. And now Mark will take us through some of the other funds. And if you have questions for general fund now, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, Mayor, we'll move on to the other major funds and Mark will touch on those.
Okay, I don't see any hands, but council, any comments or questions for Ken or Mark before we keep going? All right, I don't see any. Ken, go ahead.
Okay, Mark.
All right, thank you. So in addition to the general fund, the city has 7 other major operating funds. So we'll go through the enterprise funds first. So the enterprise funds account for those city services that are run like a business, if you will, where the users of the service provide the revenue for operations. So our first enterprise fund is the water wastewater fund. This fund is stable. We're planning a drawdown of fund balance, and that includes an increased use of cash or pay-as-you-go to fund CIP projects. The revenue assumptions we used in the model include the planned 2021 water rate increase, as well as future water rate increases based on the most recently completed comprehensive rate study. The solid waste enterprise fund is also stable. Staff does continue to monitor commercial operations for customer focused on customer retention and efficiency. It does also assume rate increases per the most recently completed rate study in the model. The next enterprise fund is the Golf Fund. They have, because since the start of the pandemic, experienced significant increase in rounds of play, which has increased the revenue. So I think the latest I saw was the revenue was like 200% above where it was last year. We don't know if that trend will continue, if the winter visitors will come back this year. But we are projecting modest surpluses in this fund starting in fiscal year 22. And capital projects for courses and buildings are not included in this fund, as they will be included as part of the CIP program and funded from secondary property tax. And our last enterprise fund, which is our newest, is the Emergency Medical Transportation or Ambulance Fund. So this program was started in 2017, and currently we have 4 ambulances in service. And we're going to add more in 2021 and 2023. So this fund, the revenue and expenses are in line with projections when we started this service. We have our special revenue fund where they have a dedicated funding source that serves as the primary revenue for these funds. So the first one is the transit fund. Like the general fund, we're making projections of where we think the revenue is going to be, but there's still a wide margin of error that could happen. So at this point, we're projecting modest increase in transit sales tax revenue, but as Ken mentioned, we'll be coming back in February with some more refined projections. The fund does include a measured spend down of fund balance in conjunction with planned expenditure reductions starting in the spring of 21. So right now we've assumed 9.5 million in recurring reductions by 23-24, but that is not a static number. So depending on how sales tax revenues increase or decrease and how well we contain costs, that number could change. And the streetcar estimated operating costs are built into that forecast. The next special revenue is the transportation or HERF fund, which is the Highway User Revenue Fund. So we use the Arizona Department of Transportation's latest forecast for HERF revenues. It is projecting modest growth. Fuel sales, which is the primary tax base for the revenue in this fund, they have returned to pre-pandemic levels, so we're hopeful that that will continue. The increased revenue projections as well as the budget reductions that were made in this fiscal year have helped to stabilize this fund. And our last special revenue fund is the Arts and Cultural Fund. So we used to call this the Performing Arts Fund, but with the new arts and cultural tax become effective January of 21, that will replace the Performing Arts tax. We have changed the name to the Arts and Cultural Fund. This has a dedicated sales tax revenue, and just like transit or general fund, we're at this point projecting modest projections, but there's a wide margin of error potential in there. So again, in February, we'll true up those numbers a little bit. The facility revenue, as you can imagine, because of social distancing, is way down, and we are forecasting just a gradual return to pre-pandemic levels. The FY21, the current year budget reductions have helped to stabilize this fund, and the forecast does assume a transition of general fund programs to the new fund starting in January of 21.
So to summarize, Mayor and Council, first I'd like to thank Mark's very small staff, Lori Vickers, Susanna Snyder, and Benicia Benson for their hard work throughout this pandemic and putting together these budget documents. But to summarize, I would like to say that, as was mentioned during the survey presentation, our staff has been able to maintain service levels at a very high level. We have not had to make emergency cuts to the budget, and a lot of that is because of the decisions you approved early in this pandemic to make budget reductions to put us in a spot where we're not going to have to make emergency decisions. We will be able to continue to provide a high level of service, and if we have to make further adjustments, we will. And in February, we'll be back to you with a more refined recommendation for how to establish parameters around next year's budget. And that's all we have, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Benicia. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken. Let's see. I see Councilmember Cubie's hand.
Thank you, Ken, Mark, and the entire staff. Really appreciate your presentation. Initially, on the first slide, you talked about general obligation bonds and how we have a gold bond rating. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, and maybe I could get this in a Friday packet, but what defines a gold bond rating? Are we at the upper limit of it? Do we have room to grow? For instance, if we wanted to put a bond up related to another issue, like, I don't know, affordable housing, for example, how close are we to that limit where we wouldn't be a gold bond rating? And how is that determined?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember. We have a AAA bond rating, which is the highest bond rating you can achieve. And our bond authorization that we just received overwhelmingly from the voters this week represents the amount that we can repay with our secondary property tax as we collect it. As you know, we have a stabilization policy for our property tax, and one of the reasons we get such a strong response in authorizing our bonds is because our voters and our taxpayers know that those bonds don't represent increases to the current property taxes that they're paying other than inflationary. So to answer your question as best I can, the GO bonds that we asked for authorization represent the maximum amount that we're comfortable issuing, knowing that we can repay them with the secondary property tax and have that secondary property tax only increase at the level of inflation so as to not add new tax burden to our taxpayers. So whether we could issue additional bonds for other uses, typically, and I've seen this in other cities, I'm thinking of Los Angeles. Los Angeles issued bonds specifically for affordable housing and for housing shelters, and they had an accompanying new tax to repay those bonds.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate it. Hey, Ken and Mark, I just want to say thank you for that. I love the approach. I just wanted to say that I appreciate you guys kind of taking that little bit of conservative route, knowing that we have no idea what's really going to happen. I know our hotels are struggling. I think hopefully our special events will start to come back a little bit slowly but surely. And I'd rather be a little bit more cautious when it comes to our financial budget. And I definitely like that approach too. So, I want to say thank you for that. And just, say thank you to our employees, because I think with the last presentation with the community survey, it just really shows that, we've been really working hard and doing everything we can to maintain the city services that our residents expect and enjoy. So that doesn't happen by chance. I think it happens by great leadership. So Ken, you and Mark have definitely led the way in a lot of those efforts. And I want to say thank you to that. And Mayor, I just want you to know that I support the direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I'll just say that we really appreciate you acknowledging the hard work that the staff is putting in to maintain the service levels that we have with the number of positions that we froze during the last budget process. It truly talks about the professionalism of our staff. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Councilmember Adams.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I agree with what Councilmember Arredondo Savage said about her comments, and I just want to thank Ken and Mark and your staff for their hard work with this presentation. I also, how much I love looking at the budget numbers, and appreciate you showing us all the various scenarios during this crazy COVID time. Our employees are I know, working super hard, and a lot of them are very thinly staffed right now because of our of this budget situation. So I just want to send a thank you out to our employees too for going the extra mile during this very difficult time. And thanks again, Ken and Mark and your staff.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams.
Thank you so much. Any other council members, any comments or questions for Ken or Mark?
Thank you.
I'll just say the same thing that everyone else said. I really appreciate the presentation, and I think the work that we do in finance and budget, frankly, is exceptional. And Ken, thank you for your leadership, and just really appreciate the presentation and, frankly, the trajectory the city's headed on. But thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and council members.
Thank you, Mayor and council members.
All right, let's see. Next up here, we have item 2E, which is strategic management update and strategy tool for aligning resources in Tempe start process. And I'm assuming that's probably going to be Rosa making the presentation.
Yes, it is.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think they're giving me access, yes. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. I am back, and with me I have Mark Day, our Budget Director. And this is the conversation that we start annually with you regarding how our strategic plan is, just updates on the strategic plan, but also how it aligns with performance-led budgeting. Next slide. So the update will include, and it's very short and simple, but it starts the conversation with all of you as far as prioritization for the budget. I will give you an update on the performance measures from our departments, the revised, removed, and proposed. The START tool, which is our strategy tool for aligning resources in Tempe, which is a very transparent tool for the public to understand how we take the council's priorities and what they have shared with us in the community and these surveys over the years and try to apply that through our budget process. And then lastly, talk about the acceleration models as they are coming up also. Next slide. So real quickly, in years past, this slide became very complicated because we were just starting our strategic plan. The good thing is we have now stabilized our strategic plan with about 103 performance measures. And I have very few updates and revisions, but I have to applaud the work of our staff and our departments because they have really taken hold of looking at the performance and the process, but also looking at it from the community's lens to see how they are performing or serving the public. And we see that through our community survey. So I really applaud their work. So real quickly, the revised performance measures simply the feeling of safety. That is basically just a change in the language regarding the scale. So I think Councilmember Kuby had mentioned in the previous presentation, Elucid is a company that the police department contracts with to do monthly sentiment surveys. And they have gone from a scale of 0 to 10 to 0 to 100. So that is just the edit on that language. 1.13 is safe drinking water. As we know, the US EPA has standards regarding drinking water, and for us, it's making sure that we're transparent and reporting on the safety of our tap water as far as drinking. 1.29 is victims of crime engagement. And this is a very powerful one, and that's basically a small revision, but if I can take a minute to explain this. So much like our fire department has to respond or wants to respond and get to a victim very quickly, and those are life-saving moments. We recognize that healing of being a victim of a crime is just as important, the timeliness and the engagement piece. So that really looks at how do we measure the engagement, how well we are engaging with victims of crime, not just for their healing process, but more importantly also, or just as important, is the prosecution for social justice. We know that if people are engaged, they tend to prosecute the perpetrators. 2.06, police trust score, much like the feeling of safety. That one was just looking at revisions regarding the scale. 3.27, Shelley Seiler has done a great job of explaining the traffic delay performance measure, and I would just say that that's just bringing it back to you for full adoption of that language, which is in your packet. 3.32, patient advocate services, and for the public, patient advocate services is really the service that our fire medical rescue serves the public, and recognizing that some of our community members need more attention, and instead of just calling emergency services, these are trained fire department personnel that go into the homes of individuals like our veterans or other community members who are in need and try to prevent them from having to go to emergency rooms or call emergency services. So this is really looking at changing the performance measure to track how well our PAS service is working and reducing 50% of the calls of the individuals who are in the PAS program. What Works City certification, as we know, we're very proud to say that we are a platinum city designated by the Bloomberg organization. And that is just adopting the full language and making sure now the hard work is keeping up with that certification standard. 4.03 is water conservation, and that is basically taking our water performance measure and breaking down the class customer service, single, multifamily, and landscaping. Solid waste diversion, the only addition to that or edit was the making sure that we identify that it's going to the landfill in that solid waste performance measure. 4.11 is looking at tree coverage. And that's one of the long conversations we've had in this organization regarding tree coverage. Initially, it was 25% of tree canopy within our city and city property, but we recognized that we could really expand that if we work with our partners through development agreements and private sector, private property to really create a great, impressive tree canopy in our city. So it's bold, but it's Tempe. Next slide. Thank you. Just a few edits to this one. Victim of crime service has been retired, and that is collapsed into performance measure 1.29. And then the other one is financial inclusion, which is a proposed, we're looking at creating a proposed performance measure for the financial inclusion portion of our Right to Breathe program or initiative. We have actually received a small grant through City Start, thanks to Wydell Holmes, looking for some grant funding to help us. When I always say it's hard to be first, so we don't have any benchmark of a financial inclusion performance measure, so they will work with us. They're very interested in looking at what Tempe will be creating for the most vulnerable in our community as far as financial inclusion. Next slide. So the START tool, strategy tool for aligning resources in Tempe. This was in-house created by our staff here and looking at ways to involve or to engage the policyholders or yourself, mayor and council, to please let us know the priorities that you have for the coming year. So I think Council Member Arredondo Savage mentioned moving up the community survey, and we usually move up the business survey and the employee survey earlier in the year, as soon as the fiscal year starts, in order for us to capture that data and share it with you in the START tool. So in October, Mark Wittenberg and his team prepares a START tool, thanks to Cindy Lachey, and they start to incorporate the survey results. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes, and I really appreciate the partnership and collaboration. And starting tomorrow, you will receive the START tool. And for those of you who have not been on the council, please do not worry. Cindy Lachey will work with your council aides, and we're here to support you as far as taking the 100 theoretical dollars and allocating them in the areas that you would like to see us accelerate or move forward this coming year. November 13th, START tool due from council, and we recognize that's an ambitious goal. We've never had it back within 1 week, but we thought we would set the expectation and hope that we can get there. December 3rd, we will come back with the budget team and release the START tool results and have a conversations as far as priorities for the coming budget year, along with the CIP and operating. And if I can just take a moment there, this is very important. This is performance-led budgeting of taking your priorities and operationalizing them through our operation and CIP budget process. That's the alignment, true alignment of all of this. Next slide. This is just a snapshot giving you a brief look at what your START tool will have. It is arranged with the 5 council priorities. What you have in front of you is just the 5th council priority of financial stability and vitality. But you will see, for example, 5.01 is the quality of business services. And we have it in, if it's in gold, we haven't reached that target yet, some room for improvement. And then right after the performance measure language, you will see a CS 1718, and that's the codes that we'll share with you, whether it was been in the community survey as highlighting as a priority for our community, in what year. And then you will see the trend analysis, because we will have 1 year after another listed. The green as 5.02, thanks to the great work of economic development and others, new jobs created. We are reaching that goal, and that's why it's in the green, reaching that target. But also it has been listed as community survey importance is 1718. Next slide.
Thanks, Rosa. As Rosa mentioned, what we do is we operationalize the results of the STAR tool in our performance-led budgeting process. So once the council's top priorities are identified, the Office of Strategic Management and Diversity, so Rosa's group, will work with departments to do a hyper-focus on those performance measures to determine strategies to advance their achievement. So there's three approaches that we take. One is to collaborate. So a department may work with an outside agency or other departments to advance a performance measure. So over the last couple of years, we've kind of broken down the silos, and we've seen departments working together to submit, let's say, operating budget supplemental requests to advance a performance measure. So some of the things that come to mind were desert park cleanup, safety in the parks, those type of things. Another approach that we could take is we could shift resources. So if we are overachieving, if you will, in one area, we may take some of those resources and shift them to those performance measures that you have identified as priorities. And then the third area would be additional funds. So departments may request through the budget process, through an operating budget supplemental or through the CIP, some additional funds to be allocated to advance the achievement of a performance measure. And that's really critical why we're asking for this information now before we start into the budget process starting in December. So at this point, we're not asking through the tool to allocate specific dollars like $500 million towards this project. The purpose of the STAR tool is to have you identify your top priorities. And then we'll start with once we have those results in December, we'll start with the performance-led budgeting process. So I thought I'd, whoops, went too far there. Briefly go over what happened in last year's budget process. Hang on, sorry. So council provided direction early in the process. There were 7 performance measures that consensus was reached on to accelerate. So just as a refresher, those were pavement quality index, right-of-way landscape, traffic delay reduction, mental health and wellness, housing inventory ratio, tree and shade canopy, and carbon neutrality. So since we had that direction early in the process, the Strategic Management and Diversity Office worked with the departments to develop acceleration models. And so through the CIP process and the operating budget, additional funding requests were made. But that all kind of happened when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So unfortunately, we weren't able to fund all of the requests, but we did fund some of them. So I just want to go over those. So in the current adopted CIP, we did fund $59 million in additional budget over 5 years compared to the previous CIP. So for example, $18 million was added to traffic delay reduction, $1.4 million to tree and shade canopy, and $5 million for PQI, or pavement quality index. I just want to take one moment to talk about right-of-way landscape because I know it came up in the resident survey, community survey. So we knew that this was one of council's top priorities, and we intended to allocate additional funding in this year's budget towards this measure. And there was an operating budget supplemental that would have increased funding to maintain existing landscape. And then through the CIP, additional funding was requested to improve and add to right-of-way landscaping. But unfortunately, we weren't able to move forward with the operating budget supplemental requests due to the anticipated decline in revenues due to COVID. And for the CIP, there was an operating impact of $100,000 a year. And last spring, if you'll remember, we were trying to limit the number of CIP projects that impacted the operating funds. So what we did is we moved $3 million from the right-of-way landscape into pavement quality index project, because that CIP had minimal operating impacts and it would advance that measure. So I just wanted to go over that really briefly. So even though through the operating budget we only approved a few supplementals, we did fund 7 youth specialists that support the achievement of mental health and wellness measure, and 1 integrated traffic signal technician in support of the traffic delay reduction measure. So at this time, it's probably a good opportunity to check on the status of the 7 performance measures that were identified as top priorities last year.
Thanks, Mark. So in the slide that Mark is pulling up, he will show you the 7 performance measures that you asked us to look at accelerating. And as Mark says, we had hoped that, well, like anyone, we didn't want a pandemic, and that obviously changed the trajectory of having us accelerate things a little quicker. Here are the results of the performance that we accelerated from last year. So this is actually the pavement quality index. So I don't want that to get confused with the community survey. So we survey, the pavement quality is actually the index, a scientific index of our pavement quality, and the community survey is the perception. But those 2 data points, to Councilmember Kuby's, are data points that we merged together to really understand that we're not off track with understanding how the public sees us. Pavement quality index went up by 1 point, and that is an average or a compilation of arterial streets, collector streets, and neighborhood streets. And you will also see in the community survey that there is a distinction in those questions, and I call your attention to that, because I think one of the things we've seen in the community survey is the request to focus on the neighborhood streets. Right-of-way landscaping went down 4.5 points. Pretty self-explanatory. I think we had 6 new landscaping projects last year, and in this coming year, we only have budgeted for 2. So that obviously impacts the progression on the performance measure. Traffic delay reduction went down. We're very happy about that. We're not sure if we can take ownership for that, but we'll take a win. Mental health and wellness. We are ambitiously, Naomi and her team, Human Services, trying to come up with a way that we measure an outcome of having a healthy mental health in our community. So they are working with Vitalists to identify the right language and outcomes that we would like to see, and how do we measure that. Housing inventory ratio, a lot of conversations regarding affordable housing. This was one of those conversations we also had and consulted with Bloomberg on best ways to see that or to approach it. The housing inventory ratio was completed about 3 to 4 years ago. Levon and his team plan to have the new inventory ratio by the end of the year, which will give us an update. So right now we don't have the data to let you know if it's advanced, but we will look at the new inventory and compare that to the years prior. Tree and shade canopy went up slightly. I know that Richard and Craig from our community services, our arborists, are working on how to create the data or how to collect the data regarding our assets of our trees and shade. So they are busy trying to capture that data, and I'm sure we will have some results in the coming years. Carbon neutrality is a performance measure that has data or an inventory every 5 years, and I believe it's 2021 that the 2020 data will give information to update that performance measure. And then next slide is basically thank you, and we're here to take any questions you may have regarding the START tool or any of the budget.
Great, thank you, Rosa. Thank you, Mark. Any members of council have any comments or questions? I don't see any hands up. I see one now, Councilmember Kuby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Rosa. Really appreciate it. I had a question with the goals for tree and shade and carbon neutrality. Those are, we have date-specific goals. Like in the case of tree and shade, it's for double our tree and shade canopy by 2040. So my concern is, without making big jumping advancements, we're going to be, we'll leave a future council in the year 2035 or later to have to really invest. And we all know that the most effective way to, the best time to plant a tree was 7 years ago. So I'm wondering, maybe this is the time to talk about that, but I'm hoping that we'll see an advancement of that that's beyond 0.6%. So we don't sort of lead it all to the end of our goal year.
Mayor, Councilmember Kuby, that is a very valid question. I think we're going to see that with a few of our performance measures and how this pandemic has taken a toll a little bit on the economy. Obviously, we have Ken Jones and Mark Day at the helm with our budget, but those are the conversations. So the idea is that the START tool that you receive tomorrow helps the council give us their priorities. We gather that information, and that is when we'll bring back acceleration models eventually to you, but have those concerted conversations within staff and with our city manager to look at how we help to accelerate or even stabilize some of our performance measures. Because honestly, we're lucky if it doesn't backslide for some of them. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, and just knowing that we have, the first urban forester in the state of Arizona, and having Richard Adkins there, it's like, we hired him and made that position because we took that goal and that public engagement process that led to that goal so seriously. So I'm glad to hear that. And my second question, and thank you for the time, was about performance measures. And I know when we closed out the drought and resilience group, the working group, I think we gained council consensus, or maybe we could gain it tonight. And I totally agree that we should expand the water conservation measure to include customer classes. I'm so glad that's happening. But I expected to see additional water conservation and drought resilience performance measurements. And perhaps that's being worked on by water staff. And so I wanted to ask about that, and maybe talk about council if we don't have that plan. But I know SRP has really led the way in water performance measures, and they provide a really good lead for us in their 2035 sustainability goals.
Mayor, Councilmember Kuby, I'd be happy to speak with Terry Picars, Director of Municipal Utilities, and Tara Ford from Overwater, and we will get you that information regarding the plans for any other performance measures.
And Mr. Mayor, I'll close out, but just wanted to, in case Rosa and I need to have more direction, we did talk about the working group and I thought we gained consensus, and maybe we just gained it tonight, about those additional water conservation and drought resilience performance measurements. And even with the instruction of look at SRP and how they're leading the way.
Sounds good. Councilmember Kuby, just to make sure, are you looking for some kind of additional consensus, or are you saying that you think that consensus was reached at a previous meeting regarding that issue?
Well, I thought we had it, but I don't remember so clearly. So, and Rosa, Rosa's, Rosa, you're not pushing back against this at all. But I just thought, in case we didn't talk about it, that maybe it would be a good opportunity to reaffirm that we'd like to see additional water conservation and drought resilience performance measurements.
Okay, sounds good.
Mayor and Councilmember Kuby, absolutely. We'll look at what was discussed and consensus during that time, and absolutely report back.
And I guess I'll take kind of an opposite look here. If no council members have any comments regarding Councilmember Kuby's suggestion, I'm just going to go ahead and take that as consensus. I'll give you a few seconds to raise your hand or unmute yourselves.
Hi, Mayor Woods. This is Councilmember Adams.
Yes, please.
Hi. Yes, I just want to thank Ms. Inchowski and Mark Day, Mr. Day, for their excellent presentation. And this really helps us, this whole program really helps us know what to focus on and what the priorities are. And I think it's a great tool, and I really appreciate all your hard work on it, because I know it's not easy. And the knowledge base that Ms. Inchowski and Mr. Day have about the whole city and what all the operations are, and is amazing. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, too. I just want to agree with Councilmember Adams and say thank you to Rosa and Mark. You guys are awesome. You guys know how much I love the START tool. So go ahead and laugh. It's never been one of my favorite things, but I do think it's a good tool. So I'm going to work through it and definitely appreciate, you guys have been so thorough and just really trying to be inclusive and making sure that we're identifying all of our priorities. And I think that's really good for us. So thank you so much for that. And Mayor, on to the first comment, I'm just not really ready to join into the consensus. I'd rather have Rosa go back and look at the notes and just make sure that's what we agree to. I'm just not ready to have that discussion right now as I don't have that information in front of me. Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay, what we can do then, whatever, if, Councilmember QB was talking about how this might have been in a previous meeting, would it be okay, I guess, between, Rosa, you, and maybe Carla to go back and check the previous meeting minutes to see if there was consensus gained on that issue? And if there wasn't, then we obviously can bring it back to have a conversation about adding that as a consensus. I mean, Councilmember QB, would you be okay with us just taking a look at the previous meeting minutes from that working group?
Sure, but I did hear from staff to say it was in the memo as part of the closeout recommendations and discussed openly. We had a discussion about it. No one disagreed or said anything. So we believe we did have the consensus, but I'm happy for Rosa to go back and look to the record. But actually, we're only asking to look at SRP's goals. And I think it's always good as one of our signature, the water provider, to align our goals, our water conservation and drought resilience goals with SRP. So, that's why I thought I'd bring that up today, just to reaffirm that.
Okay. Yeah, so I say, Rose, if you want to go back and just check and just see, if that was already, if that consensus was already reached. If it wasn't for whatever reason, I would be, totally happy with you bringing it back so we can actually get council consensus regarding Councilmember QB's suggestion. I mean, I think it's a good one personally, but I think we should just go back and just take a quick look.
Will do, Mayor.
Thank you. All right. Any other council members, any comments or questions? All right. Let's see. Hearing none, I guess we're good. Rosa, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And Mark, thank you as well. Just wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
I got to talk to Councilmember Arredondo Savage after this meeting to find out the inside joke about the START tool. So that'll be after hours. So. Next up, item 2F, which is the Park Safety Program, Progress Report and Future Considerations. Just a little bit of a lead into this. I think we're going to have Chief Glover come up with members of his team to make a presentation. But a little bit of a lead in. I know we had a previous conversation surrounding this item, and we probably went for about 45 minutes to an hour that night and kind of came to kind of a rough consensus about trying to go back to G4S to get them back out into the parks to provide some park security for a lot of our residents that have been talking about an urgent need for it. At the same time, I remember Councilmember QB during that meeting talked about the fact that Chief Glover was coming online as our new chief pretty quickly and wanted to make sure that we could actually go back and talk with him about what his vision might be for the park security program moving forward. And so with that, I know I spoke with our Deputy City Manager, Ken Jones. He went ahead and started working on the G4S portion of things, but Chief Glover went back to take a look at, kind of what we already had in place and what the council direction was. But he wanted to provide some input on a program that he thinks might work moving forward. So with that, council, I asked him to come present that tonight. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chief Glover.
Thank you, Mayor Woods. Good evening, Council. Commander Scott Smith and I will be presenting on this topic of park safety. If we can go ahead and pull up our presentation. Okay, so we'll start with our first slide. Performance measures, feeling of safety in parks 1.23, achieve rating of very satisfied or satisfied with the feeling of safety in parks. Greater than or equal to the top 10% of the national benchmark cities as measured in the community survey. October of 2018, we conducted a pilot park security program that was implemented using the existing G4S contract. The program concluded in late June of 2020. This program provided a consistent, visible, and positive presence to deter criminal activity and violations within the parks. It instilled a sense of safety for parks visitors through visible walking patrols. It was effective in establishing communication and educating some of the frequent visitors of the parks. The program provided for connections to be made to human services for individuals who are in need, and G4S was, they've also been trained to contact Tempe Fire Medical Rescue, Police Department, and or parks maintenance for needs as appropriate. On October 1st of 2020, in the work study session, city staff was directed to evaluate and begin work on developing a long-term park security solution and reactivating the G4S Park Security Program to serve as a security service bridge until the permanent solution could be enacted. Next slide. Since last work study session, work began on re-implementation of G4S Park Security Program. At our last work study session meeting, the established timeline for full-scale G4S deployment with the same level of service delivery and coverage was approximately 1 month, so that training, the equipment, and appropriate staffing could be reachieved. The G4S personnel selected to participate in the program, they had underwent background examinations, firearms related certification through G4S and the state of Arizona. Additionally, they received the same La Frontera impact mental health in-service training, which select Tempe police officers have attended. The class attendees were taught how to identify symptoms associated to someone experiencing mental illness, communication techniques, which could be utilized for de-escalating very volatile situations. And additionally, G4S staff received training by Tempe Police and Tempe Human Services, Hope and Care 7. The personnel in some of the personnel in that training that went through it were able to receive training on radio usage, report documentation, implicit bias, and scenario-based training. This training was taking place, which allowed for us to have a full-scale deployment back in select parks that can be, as of today. It is believed that we will have immediate and positive impact on the feeling of safety in our parks. The G4S personnel complete in a little over 5 months of time proactively about 3,925 contacts in 2020 within our parks. In approximately 8 months, we had about 562 proactive checks from our police officers. This program allowed for an increase in uniform park security patrols and an increase in community contacts and interaction. The utilization of park security helps to increase the visibility needed for crime deterrence and increase the overall safety. Estimates for a 1-year contract with G4S from November 1st, 2020 to October 31st of 2021 would be about $441,965. Next slide. Since the last work study session, initial planning meetings and consultation meetings have been conducted with and between the police department and human resources, parks and recreation, and human services. Currently, park police officers work with the HOPE team from human services together weekly in an effort to locate, educate, and offer services to people experiencing homelessness, as well as informing individual or future cleanups. Currently, the HOPE team assists with several activities such as street outreach, navigation of mental health services and the providers, crisis prevention and education, access to emergency shelter services and housing, mediation, follow-up support, as well as collaborating with other service providers within the city. In an assessment of needs and costs, a low financial estimate to bring back full-scale park ranger program, which was something that was brought up in the last meeting, would cost somewhere between $1.5 to $2 million between salary, benefits, equipment, and vehicles. Staff members, leadership of the police, human services, parks and recreation do not believe the traditional park ranger program would meet the security and human services needs of our citizenry. It would not be fiscally responsible at this time and believe developing a more robust and collaborative program comprised of staff, from the police department, human services department in a combined fashion that would offer a better long-term return on our investment. Next slide. Contingent to this evening upon the approval by the City Council and the City Manager to be able to utilize contingency funding to pay for G4S security services, G4S security personnel can be in service and back in the parks by this weekend. The utilization of G4S in the parks would also be on as a basically as an as needed basis, dealing with parks that may have reported criminal activity. It would be important for us to deploy G4S, focus on a focused crime deterrent measure as a way to deal with any emerging trends to assist us in keeping our parks safe. In the meantime, a more robust park security program developed and staffed by personnel from Police Department and Human Services, which will be able to provide safety, security, and mental health social services is being developed by staff and will be presented during the city's normal budgetary approval process. This process is estimated to take up to 3 to 6 months of implementation. We're looking at the Police Department and Human Services at agreeing on a shared vision for a program that would partner with Human Services to provide a larger presence in the park with the HOPE team, who can provide a more holistic service for our homeless population. This would allow for us to scale back the presence of G4S and or park officers, which would be used intermittently only as needed, and allows us to conduct enforcement in the parks only when necessary for criminal activity. And it assists us in avoiding the cycle of criminalizing homelessness in our parks and that repeated cycle that does come up at times. Next slide. And with that, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Chief Glover. Really appreciate it. I just have a couple of questions. So one, just at a very basic level here for a resident who's going out to any one of our parks. I mean, we know Tempe's got more parks per square mile than any city in the East Valley. So just for them, if under the new program that you're talking about implementing in partnership with our Human Services group, what would people see when they get to the park? So let's just say I happen to go to Hudson Manor Park on the weekend, and I walk out there and I'm looking around. What would I see from a city presence standpoint when the new system is implemented? Am I going to see people who are representative of the HOPE team and of Care 7 by themselves? Am I going to see G4S, people out there, or I'm just curious as to who's going to be the front-facing group leading this sort of new effort that you've talked about.
So initially, the front-facing group that we would have out there is G4S for those parks that are experiencing the type of criminal activity and or suspicious activity that would need for them to be out in public and doing any type of contact and or enforcement action. Outside of that, the goal of what we're looking at is trying to ensure that we are actually having Human Services be the face and be the people that are out there with the HOPE team to be out there actively providing those services and being the ambassadors of the park. For the police department, we will continue to work on any type of activities in terms of any type of criminal activities that are going on within those parks, and be coordinating and speaking with Human Services to make that coordination. But we believe that it's more beneficial and more effective to have the outreach portion being conducted after we've addressed any issues that are lingering in the park, and then we can utilize G4S only on an as needed basis, as well as the park officers to then follow up and provide assistance. As HOPE team members are out there, they can also be reporting to us if there is a need for them for the park officers to be actively involved. They would do the same as many of the G4S or anyone else would, which is to have those officers respond out to assist them on any situations that would come up.
So basically, and I appreciate the explanation. So basically, if I go out to, as I said before, to Hudson Manor Park, what I'm going to probably see when the new, not probably, but what I would see under a new system would be people from like something that looks like an expanded Hope team, clearly in, kind of uniform or something of that nature, I imagine. So it's creating a visible presence in the park, because that was, I know, something that a lot of our neighborhood leadership reached out about. Like their biggest thing was, we need visible presence in the park to help and assist with some of the challenges we're dealing with. So what I would then see, whatever would be people, members of that Hope team, sort of in partnership with Human Services out there, but the G4S officers would only be out there or G4S security people or the police if there was a situation where there was sort of determined criminal activity going place that you needed to tamp down, or an immediate emergency situation you needed to respond to. The basic thing I'm trying to get at is, we're trying to transfer to a system that is much more about having Human Services take the lead on these issues and really trying to address the root challenges that we're facing, or that some of the folks in the parks might be facing, and beginning to de-emphasize, sort of a police presence or a armed security presence, and really trying to get to the root of a lot of these challenges. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The hope is to be able to, for the police department to be able to take a step back on some of these issues as it relates to homelessness, and be able to put people that are out there that actually are able to provide a good service to our community members, to our homeless folks that are in the parks. So that way they are providing that bridge service, because there's many times where our officers are out there, our park officers are out there, and they do a phenomenal job. But the homeless population doesn't always want to have contact by a police officer. So that's where, when creating a cohort fashion type of model with Human Services, to be able to have them as that park ambassador can really address some of those issues and the needs that are there, because a lot of the feeling of safety within the park has a lot to do with some of our homeless population that have now sort of created the encampments there. And so and instead of going out to do strict, harsh enforcement, which would then create a whole nother cycle of criminalizing homelessness, we'd like to avoid that and look at other options. So we're continuing to work with Human Services to figure out what is the best model for Tempe.
I really appreciate you saying that, Chief. You said something in that statement that I really agree with, and I've heard councils talk about in the past as well, as the notion of decriminalizing homelessness, about saying, we really have to attempt to get to the root cause of some of these challenges, about why someone ends up in that situation in the first place. And frankly, many times a police response may not be the thing that really helps to get that person where they need to be, or to connect them to the services, even though our police officers do a fabulous job. But getting folks out there who are actually trained when it comes to Human Services is the right direction. The other thing is, and I know we've talked about this, privately even, is a lot of officers talking about, I got into the profession of law enforcement because I really wanted to fight crime and to protect and serve. I didn't get into the profession of law enforcement to get into Human Services. That's clearly a different skill set that someone else is trained for in a way that I might not be. And so in a sense, I feel like this would probably begin to relieve a lot of the stress off of our police officers and even the folks working at G4S, because we actually are kind of taking this much more front-facing model of putting people out there who've been trained in Human Services to address these issues.
Yes, absolutely.
The other last couple of questions that I want to move to a couple of the council members. Do we know of any other cities in Arizona that are kind of doing a similar thing, or is there another program in the country that perhaps this sort of new approach you're talking about is modeled after?
Well, on this, I'll defer over to Scott Smith, who's done a lot of the research on this. Scott, are you on?
Yep. Can everyone hear me?
Hey, Commander Smith, how are you?
Excellent. Good evening. So when we take a look at, our current makeup with our police officers, our park officers, and members of our HOPE team. It's actually modeled off of several different approaches that are actually occurring at police departments nationwide, and they're referred to as different type of things, hot teams or HOPE teams, things of that nature. There are several units like that up in the Pacific Northwest, but you're starting to see what law enforcement nationally is seeing is that we're really getting a good return on investment when we partner up law enforcement that are specially trained along with members of outreach teams with backgrounds in counseling and mental health services. And really, we talked last time about the continuum of care that our officers and HOPE team and G4S to some degree provide the individuals in our community who need to be connected up to social services if they are suffering from mental illness or if they are a member at the time of the homeless community. The idea is to try and navigate that person to transitional housing and then being able to be self-sufficient and sustaining. But what that needs is a comprehensive a continuity of care. There are estimates out there that, in order to get someone who may be suffering from mental illness and may be on the street or suffering from some sort of chemical dependency issue, it takes somewhere up to 170 independent contacts by members of collaborative teams to try and convince that person to trust the system, if you will, and accept services. And so it's not a new concept by any means. It is being utilized across the country. When you take these types of collaborative teams, they do have that specialized training, more so above and beyond a traditional police officer. And so, when you get that type of mix, it has been very successful and offer a return on investment, to really help navigate our at-risk population, if you will, or a population that really does need some help and assistance to get them to that help and assistance. As we discussed earlier, our two park officers right now are at the limit, if you will, in terms of workload. When we pair up our HOPE team, Kelly and there's several other members of the HOPE team from Human Services. Kelly rides with our park officers. And so when our park officer goes to make contact or Kelly goes to make contact, it's one and the same. And it's when someone sees a police officer coming, there may immediately be a negative connotation, right, of the person that's being approached. When you actually watch the dynamic of what is occurring, it's actually a contact that's based on positivity. And it's a contact that's based on a team approach of, hey, you've got some experts in the field from varying different perspectives that can navigate a person and help them through their challenges in a variety of ways. And so when you bring a collaborative team together, it is something that really has a greater probability of success rather than trying to approach a problem single-handedly and singularly from a siloed type approach. When we talk about feelings of safety in the park, right, there was some discussion earlier that Chief Glover provided some commentary and information on. When we talk about the feeling of safety in the parks as a strategic goal from our city council in strategic priority 1.23, we talked last time about that graph that we put up showing there was a decline before our pilot program and then an incline once we introduced a uniformed, consistent presence in the parks. Our G4S was deployed during the pilot program based off of metrics of which parks were seeing the most community complaints, which parks were seeing the most calls for service. And so deployment was essentially tailored every week or 2 weeks between myself and my predecessor, Commander Horn, and then the G4S Major, now Colonel Pellerin. And so we were having presence in the parks that were needing the most attention. When we did it and had that approach, we had a successful trend back up into the feeling of safety in parks. And in sitting through the presentation from ETC, you know, our metrics showed that we had a positive impact on improving feeling of safety in parks with consistent presence in the parks. When you take a look at the presence and feeling of safety in our desert parks, he demonstrated, the representative from ETC showed that in 2019 we had an 8.8% increase, which showed that, you know, constant, consistent presence in parks has a positive impact on the feeling of safety in parks. So I know you asked a very simple question, and I'm sorry I went a long way, but hopefully I kind of addressed some of the questions that were out there.
No, I appreciate it, Commander Smith. Thank you. And I was going to say, you know, when you were describing the program of sort of pairing up human services professionals along with sometimes with law enforcement, sounded a lot like a program. And I know I've had conversations with council members Garland and Kuby about called the Cahoots model, I believe that is. I was wondering, and I think our deputy city manager, I think Stephen Methvin, I think you're on the line as well. I think you've also been involved in some of those conversations. Stephen, are you there?
Oh, there you are. There I am. Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you, Alex, for getting me on. Hey, thank you, Mayor, for the question. You are absolutely right. The Cahoots model in Eugene, Oregon is something that very closely mirrors our current Care 7 and Hope Team models in Tempe. And what they focus on, to help explain this somewhat for the community, is our Hope Team and our Care 7 models and the Cahoot model focus on crisis counseling. They focus on suicide prevention and assessment and intervention, conflict resolution and mediation, grief and loss counseling, substance abuse, transportation to services, housing crises. It goes on much more than, you know, the terrific work that our police officers do. They get to know, much like our police officers do, but our Care 7 and Hope Team employees get to know the individuals who are in our parks and understand, like you said earlier, what the root cause is. And they build a relationship with these individuals to get them into housing. You know, just last year we had we responded to nearly 2,000 calls through Care 7 and assisted nearly 3,400 folks that were out there in all areas of crisis. So, but to answer your question very, very directly, it's the Cahoots model in Eugene, Oregon that closely matches our Care 7 and our Hope Team model.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And just the last thing, last question, I am going to move on to Vice Mayor Keating after this. Just out of curiosity, and I don't know, Chief Glover or Ken Jones, if you're on the line, I know, Chief, you talked about an implementation kind of window of 3 to 6 months. If we even did 3 months, let's just say on the very quick end, we're talking about, I guess, probably maybe beginning of, end of January, beginning of February. If we decided we wanted to implement such a program right now, and that's of course, at Chief Glover, you working with Naomi Farrell from Human Services, would that be some kind of additional budget impact that we would have to go back to talking about finding another source of funds? Because and the reason why I ask this question is because I really like this model. I think it's incredibly innovative. I think it's something that I don't see other cities throughout the East Valley doing. And I think it really is the right program to, frankly, get our human services professionals out there addressing the root causes here. But also, frankly, it's being respectful to the members of law enforcement who do an exceptional job for the city of Tempe, but really would like to, be in the process of fighting crime and not doing, a park patrol. And so I'm just curious, if we do this in a 3 to 4 month window, does that create some kind of budgetary issue where this council needs to come back and talk about a reallocation of dollars to make the implementation faster?
Mayor Woods. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
Well, I was going to comment, thanks, Chief. I was going to comment on the budgetary impact, and that is we didn't budget anything for the parks program because it was a pilot that ended in June and there was nothing reallocated to that. So my recommendation would be that to re-implement this, we would expect you to dip into the contingency, general fund contingency, which started out at 1.5 million. And to my recollection, we have spent, I think, 10,000 on feral cats and 65,000 on the Sing Meadows project, and that's it out of the 1.5 million.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. Really appreciate it. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn to Vice Mayor Keating.
Sorry, Mayor, my taskbar wouldn't go down, so I could unmute myself. So I had to.
No worries, my friend. Go ahead.
Appreciate it. I want to thank Chief Glover so much for this. I'm a big fan of what you're proposing. This is obviously, a somewhat controversial issue in Tempe, fairly or unfairly, but I think you've brought forth a model that kind of makes everyone happy, at least from what I understand of it and from the mayor's follow-up questions. It seems that you're really kind of addressing everyone's concerns moving forward here as we work to increase the feeling of safety in our park and make sure that those in need are getting access to the human services that they're looking for. So I'm very impressed with this. I'm very supportive of this. I completely trust you to make the command decisions about what it looks like, not only for this temporary program, but transitioning to a more permanent model over the next, you said 3 to 6 months, which is great, because the last time we spoke about it, the estimate was a year before we would have something different than G4S in the park. So I'm really appreciative of you, Chief Glover, for this. I wholeheartedly support it and look forward to it being implemented. Thank you very much, Mayor and Chief.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating, and yeah, and you made a really good point that I forgot to mention. Right, I remember when we talked before, there was conversation about implementation being potentially a year, and I remember Councilmember Adams talked about it. Was there some way to speed that up to make sure that we get our residents the services they need in the parks now? So this is definitely shortening that timeline by a lot, and that is very much appreciated. So thank you for making that very important point. Next up, Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. And, I agree with the Vice Mayor and the words that he said too. And really just a big appreciation to Chief Glover. I know we kind of threw this at you pretty quick. You probably knew it was coming. And the Vice Mayor said, it's been a little controversial, but I think that there has been some successes in the park, and we have just the opportunity to even do better and to reach more people. So I think that your approach of putting together a really comprehensive security program, I 100% trust you that you will bring the right people to the table. We have amazing people in our HOPE team and human services that have the abilities to be able to work together and really fine tune a program. Even if we learn from other cities, we aren't other cities, but I do like the idea of utilizing what's been working for other cities and make it work for us. So I don't expect anything that you bring forward to look directly like anything that may be out there, but something that really fits our needs. So I certainly do appreciate that. I love the idea of looking at best practices around the country. I think that gives us a head start, but I'm very confident where we're going from here. And I like the idea of a comprehensive approach and really just addressing a lot of the needs and some of the concerns that I think we've heard. And I think you asked for an approval of moving forward with the G4S, and I do want to say I do approve of that right now. I know you said something about getting them back in the parks sooner than later, so that if you need approval from the council, I certainly do support that until you can come up with that security program that you're working to develop. So thank you again for your work. Thanks for everybody that you've had around the table to really, get this right and move forward in a positive direction. So thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. And just one quick point about what you said about the G4S implementation. I know that during the previous meeting when we spoke about park security, I had a lot of trepidation about actually going forward with the re-implementation of G4S in the parks because of a lot of the concerns that I've heard from residents over the last few months regarding the nature of them being armed. But my perspective is I think that everything needs a transition period to make sure that we are providing a high quality of service to our residents, and that we give Chief Glover and Naomi Farrell an opportunity to really bring their respective teams together and put together this program. So yes, so knowing that the G4S of the parks more immediately is only a bridge to this new innovative program, I'm supportive of it as well, where I wasn't before. So thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, no, Chief Glover is outstanding. Appreciate what you did. We asked to figure out a solution, hybrid solution, and you did it. And to have G4S, be there and even temporarily be there, I think it's great, or utilize them in some capacity is great. These programs have been kind of going on, I kind of beat my head a little bit, but community paramedicine started this 5 years ago, which accomplishes a lot of this stuff, but it's more dedicated to the fire end, but it does have coordinations with the PD side of it too. And then also with what we're doing here with the PD side, it all coordinates together. Long and short, we're trying to get people to the right appropriate help in the right appropriate locations. And with these services, it often takes quite a while, as you stated in your conversation, but the touches and the relationships that are built with the security guard system, with the HOPE team, with Care 7, with patient advocacy services, we have a myriad of things we're flowing on our table, and it's tremendous. As you mentioned, Care 7, 2,000 plus calls, within the year, trying to help out patients. I hope council can understand this has to get bigger. Those people are working extremely hard at this position and trying to facilitate the needs for fire and PD when it comes to mental health, when it comes to addictions, when it comes to just finding a doctor or basic help. You have no idea the benefit of a program like this. And I've seen the benefits. Milwaukee, I'll pull that one out. They have a program out there that has saved tremendous amount of time and resource and money. And you're talking about money at the hospital that people have to pay out, and it's a tremendous service. So I know we're going in the right direction. I think this is great. Things like Cahoots and modeling after other things. This is our program. Long and short, this is our program. This is City Tempe program. This is what we're going to morph it into. I'm encouraged that we're going to make this thing even better. I think we have an opportunity here to really be a guiding light for other cities to follow. But I'll tell this to the council, it is going to take some time and money, and you got to understand the resources that are going to be involved in this, because you do need qualified people that have backgrounds in mental health and addiction and counseling. You do need coordination with transportation and the vehicles to get the people to the right place, because these are time sensitive situations where you might lose someone within 10 to 15, 20 minutes and they don't want to go. So keep that in mind. I think we're on the right track, and I appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Adams.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with my council colleagues' previous comments regarding this. You know that I've been a huge fan of the Park Ranger program, but realize that things have evolved over time. And Chief Glover, I really appreciate your presentation and your manner of presentation. You did a great job. So I'm good moving forward. I know things have changed, and I also would like us to explore the idea of social workers teaming up with RPD when they go to family violence calls, and see if we can maybe kind of use this approach also on family violence calls, because they're so dangerous. And the social workers, I think, could help diffuse some of those calls and help our police department. So that's just something that I wouldn't mind being explored. Sounds like the G4S is a temporary situation, which I can live with. And then with us moving to the HOPE and Care 7 teams, I think that, they're not going to be armed. So I'm more comfortable moving forward with that approach, and then partnering with the police department. And that way we can truly help our homeless and also our neighborhoods, community feeling of safety, and getting those those people with mental health issues to the services they need as soon as possible. So thanks, Chief Glover, for your presentation, and I'm comfortable moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. Councilmember Cubie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Councilmember Adams, your words really, really resounded with me. And I appreciate your social work perspective. That's perspective we never really had on the council, and I so appreciate that. And I just wanted to ask about the, our public safety task force. We met a few weeks ago as part of the whole process, and we had a group that was discussing survivor and victim and homeless services. And there's much discussion about cahoots and about the efficacy and the great work that Care 7 is doing. So I'm full agreement with this approach. One thing that was mentioned, and it was a recommendation that came out pretty strongly, was that it was important to have a different dispatch system. That I guess the Portland Street response has a different dispatch system. It doesn't go to police. And I think here we have a lot of Care 7 calls. If I'm not mistaken, they might go to fire. But I think it might be important to consider that because I think I heard a statistic once that 40% of domestic violence calls don't happen because people don't want to necessarily call the police. So I would hope that we would consider dispatch and how we're going to apportion those calls, because we might have more success if we keep it distinct from the police. So that is one concern I wanted to raise. And then as far as G4S goes, as a temporary measure, I'm okay with it, but I'm not okay with us having weapons and having guns with G4S officers. I thought we'd sort of maybe gotten beyond that. So I'm hopeful that we won't. Maybe I could love to hear the mayor's opinion about that. I would also just like to thank the chief and thank Corey Woods for bringing groups together to try and find a better solution that we had presented previously. And Chief Glover, you came to the city of Tempe just a month ago as a potential agent of change, and I think you've already proven to be an agent of change, and I so appreciate your leadership here. We need to take a different route, and we need to rely on our strengths, and one of our strengths is Care 7. We already have the infrastructure. It's a matter of how we best expand upon that, so I so appreciate that. I know that the Eris Foundation also mentioned that the dispatch system, they service a lot of young homeless folks in the parks, at JC Park. They've also mentioned to me the dispatch issue. So my contribution is to ask that we consider a different kind of dispatch system, because I think we might be more successful, not just with parks and outreach from people in the parks, but outreach from family violence calls, as Councilmember Adams mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie.
Thanks, Councilmember Cubie. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. I know that, as a council member, that our number one duty should be public safety and caring for our residents. So this just feels really good to me. I just want to say, Chief Glover, I really appreciated your presentation, and I like the idea when you said human services and the police department are coming together for a shared vision. I think that's absolutely the right direction for us to go, working Care 7 and Hope to come up with our own or bring together our own model. I really like that. I like the security program that you're looking at, and I just want to tell you that I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for doing this. This is really important to our community, so thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. And just to quickly follow up on something Councilmember Cubie said as well, my big thing is I'm okay with the G4S officers as is if we're talking about like a 3-month time period. Because my perspective is I'm happy to support something if I know that it's a bridge to the next step. The only thing I would ask Chief Glover would be, as you're talking about formulating, along with Naomi and her team, what the new program is going to really look like, that's the time I think what I would like for you to see if we could revisit that issue that Councilmember Cubie talked about the weapons. Because if we're talking, because I can understand right now, if we're trying to get them back up and running to provide what our residents have said that they really need, going with the system as is. Because while I'm not totally comfortable with it, I think a bridge to the next step, is fine. I can live with that for another couple of months. But I do think that if we're talking about an entirely new program that really is much more human services centric and forward, I would like to see if that could be discussed when you come back to the council and talk about what that full plan will look like, and seeing if we could go with a different kind of G4S security guard, whatever, that isn't armed, for the future program you're talking about rolling out in a matter of a couple months.
Yes, absolutely, Mayor Woods.
Thank you. Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
I just wanted to agree. I mean, I'm really good with G4S the way it is, and I kind of had thought we had already had this discussion, but I think we're all on the same page here, or at least the majority of us, in the sense of, let's use this as a bridge to what that next program looks like, and then if there is a discussion of armed or unarmed, we can have that discussion. And Chief Glover can definitely talk about that and bring that back, because not only is it important to make sure that our residents are safe, I just want to ensure that the people that are out there doing the work are safe too and feel safe. And I think that he needs to be able to share what that looks like with us. So I appreciate having that discussion when the new comprehensive program comes back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Councilmember Cubie.
Yeah, as it relates to the dispatch issue, I'd like to hear from the rest of my colleagues, because I know, this has been brought up pretty strongly in the Public Advisory Task Force, and there it becomes a part, transitions to a different dispatch system, or is it, at least brought up as a subject of study? Just in hearing more about that approach, because it does seem to be the state of the art with these kinds of programs, as evidenced by the Portland Street response.
Yes, Councilmember Cubie, I apologize for not referencing that. I'll make a note to circle back, but I'm going to go to Vice Mayor Keating and then Councilmember Adams, and then I will make sure to cover that myself too.
Yeah, the Public Safety Task Force is still doing its work, so I'd like to see those recommendations come, forward and be implemented before we start, trying to create new systems on an unrelated. I mean, it's somewhat related to public safety, but for now, I'm very appreciative of the chief's plan and what he's brought forward. So I'm not willing to dictate policy at this time until the full recommendations of the Public Safety Task Force have been presented to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Councilmember Adams.
I just am supportive of looking into things. I don't think that ever hurts. So maybe if Chief Glover could look into the dispatch approach and get back to us, I'd be good with that. And I certainly respect what Vice Mayor is saying too, about getting the information back from the task force. But let's just maybe explore it a little bit and see if we can get some direction and some ideas for the dispatch. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. And yeah, to circle back on that myself, Chief Glover, I think that maybe if we could just sort of add that to the conversation about the armed G4S security guards, if we could add that to, as you're working with Naomi and her team to come up with what this new system would look like, if we could also include that conversation about what the dispatch might look like as you are creating this new model, that would be great if that's okay with you.
Yes, absolutely. We can definitely circle back with the end result of that conversation between me and Naomi.
Great, thank you. And last question, I guess, Chief Glover, on my end would be, maybe we could just circle back at some point about, kind of when you've had a chance. I know this is a great concept that you've put together, in collaboration with, Commander Smith and your team and Human Services. And I know that you've still got to kind of get together and flesh out all the details. But could you come back perhaps in a couple of months, maybe I'm thinking maybe in January, to talk about what the more complete program might look like, just so council and members of the public can hear about it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. My hope is that we'll have the frameworks of the actual model ready for and prepared to be able to present by January. So we should be able to accomplish that.
That sounds great, Chief. Thank you. Any members of council have any last comments or questions for Chief Glover?
Mayor, this is Councilmember Doreen. I just want to say that Councilmember Doreen, oh, that is so funny.
I noticed, I caught that. I was like, oh, that's a new thing? So.
Okay, I'm a little tired. Okay, I agree that we should be looking at getting some more information, I think, on the call center, trying to figure out what we're going to do with the calls for a new model. So I just wanted to say, just throw that out there. I'm supportive of that also. Thank you.
Sounds good. Excellent. All right. Well, great. Thank you so much, Chief Glover. Really appreciate you and Commander Smith giving the presentation. And just also, even though she's not been part of this specific presentation, I wanted to also shout out Naomi Farrell, our Human Services Director, for working with Chief Glover on this, and really your team kind of beginning to take the lead role when it comes to how we want to do park security and safety in our community. I think it's a very innovative approach, and I think it's something that's very much in line with the values of our residents. So I think this is really exciting stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
All right, next up we have item 2G, which is future agenda items. Council members can request any item be added to a future issue review session. And of course, in accordance with the open meeting law, there shouldn't be any discussion on this item. But if you want to add something, please raise your hands. I'll take a look. Hey, I'm not seeing anything, so no future agenda items. Next item on the agenda is the call to the audience for committee of the whole items listed under sections 4A and 4B. However, there aren't any items under those sections this evening. The next section is items in progress, and we have several closeout memos. You guys aren't going anywhere. That was just a misstep. Do any council members want to speak on any of the working group's closeout memos? And what I've got here is, well, actually, let me do this here first. Item 3 is call to the audience here. And I'll just do that. City Council welcomes public comment at this time for items listed under sections 4A and 4B, committee of the whole items on this work study session agenda. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone?
No submissions for this section, Mayor.
Great, excellent. I'm going to move on to item number 4A, committee of the whole items. 4A is items ready for city council direction or status update. We have none. Next up, item 4B, new items for city council consideration. Also none. And we've got here an item 4C. That's an items in progress I talked about before. There are some closeout memos for item C4, arterial right-of-way walls, 10, prevailing wage, and 14, workforce opportunities for people with disabilities. Do any council members on those committees want to speak to any of the closeout memos?
Mayor?
I would like to, Mayor.
Yes. Let me go. I'm sorry, the screen out. So I'm just going to go with Councilmember Navarro to start.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. Yeah, we can close out right-of-way walls as it's on the CIP and making progress to the appearance of the city. So I appreciate that. So we can close that one out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Vice Mayor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. We're closing out the prevailing wage working group, but I want to be clear as to the reasons why. This is something that Mayor Mitchell, Councilmember Navarro, and myself started a working group on, must have been fall of last year. And, we were hoping to have something forward and a new policy implemented by the summer of this year. But of course, COVID-19, like everything kind of threw us for a loop. And, at the time we were hoping to be working on it, the city was really, locked down, staff time and everything dealing with the pandemic, and rightfully so. So this is only closing out because we're moving to the committee system. I still remain very much in support of prevailing wage in the city of Tempe. And I do hope that it comes to whatever the appropriate committee is. If I'm on the appropriate committee, I'm happy to bring it forward and will always support it. But I just want to be clear that this isn't closing out because the work on prevailing wage is done. It's closing out because our process is changing. And the progress was delayed because of the pandemic, but it's still something that is important to me and I believe important to our city. So the work will continue, just under a new system starting in the new year. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. And I once again, thank you for raising a great point that if people are, members of the public are watching any of these items, Vice Mayor Keating is very correct that just because we are closing out one of the working groups is because we are transitioning to a new council committee system starting in January of 2021. So just because we are closing out these working groups does not mean that the issue that was being discussed is necessarily being closed out. It will likely just transition to a new standing committee where we'll continue to talk about that and try to continue delivering services to our residents. So thank you for pointing that out. Councilmember Arredondo Savage, you're up next.
Thank you, Mayor. Much appreciated. Just really quick, I know on the agenda is 4C14 with the workforce opportunities for people with disabilities. And I'm going to actually let Tim Gomez, speak a little bit on this, and as he's done a lot of the work. And plus, he's kind of the new guy still. So I think it's good to get his feet wet. But I just wanted to say a really big appreciation to all the individuals and groups and organizations that sat around the table to really help us address this issue and just ensure that there is equality for everybody within our city and just really great opportunities for employment. And I think we've come a long way from when we started back in 2017. And thank you to Vice Mayor Keating for being part of this group, and former Mayor Mitchell. I think that we, like I said, have definitely come a long ways, and just a great appreciation to the Maricopa County and this, the Human Services Department, and of course, I think that I would have to say that our Strategic Management and Diversity Office, did a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and I'm really grateful for them, and Human Services, like I said, and where we've come. So with that, Tim, I'm going to go ahead and let you wrap this up.
Hi, Mayor and Council. So like Councilmember Arredondo Savage said, this working group started back in 2017, and since then, the city has created a few innovative initiatives, and the two ones that really correlated with this working group were the Career Ready Tempe and the BEST program, which have had a lot of success, and they really aligned with what this working group wanted to accomplish. And at this time, we are looking to close this working group out as we are going to the council committees.
Thank you, Timmy G. Much appreciated. And Mayor, I just want to say really quick, thank you to our departments and department heads that are really offering the opportunities for individuals with disabilities to actively seek employment with the city. It doesn't happen unless we want it to. So I just want to say thank you to our employees for giving others the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage, and thank you, Tim, as well. Next up, I've got Councilmember Cubie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I really appreciate the Vice Mayor's comments about prevailing wage, and I so appreciate your leadership on this and the work that's been done, and I understand about the COVID impacts, delaying things. If it will be, since it will be integrated into a committee system, I'm hoping that the work that staff has begun will continue. I know they were looking at different cities' approaches, that there's been various approaches to prevailing wage and that differ in applicability, scope, and enforcement, and so I was hoping that that work could continue and not have a 3-month delay. So whatever committee does get that can hit the ground running, and wanted to see if there was consensus, and maybe the work's already been done. I'm not on the committee, so I don't know, on the working group, excuse me, but hoping that we have consensus that staff should continue to work on that working group task.
Mayor, I can speak to that if you don't mind.
Yes, please, Vice Mayor Keating.
Yeah, I mean, work is going to continue. We actually do have a lot of what we need, to tell you the truth. The delays were the lack of ability to have a robust public meeting and public input process, because all this was back when we really were kind of struggling with how to deal with COVID. Because this was really something that we were looking at in March, April. So, like, for example, I know we're closing out the Tempe Works working group at our next work study session, but that program is still going to continue to operate, and we're still going to continue to have input on that. So I don't think we're going to throw anything out, and I do think we're going to keep moving forward on this because it is a priority of myself, and I know Councilmember Navarro, and from your public comments tonight, and just from what I know about you yourself as well. So I don't think anything's going to stop just because the working group's being closed, and that's kind of what I was trying to say is it's important that this keep moving forward, because it is going to be an issue that this council will consider. Hopefully in the near future. We'll see how, we'll have to see how the committee structure works out and who's on what committee, but I'm certainly supportive of continuing to move this along and have this discussion.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. I really appreciate your leadership.
Excellent. Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Really appreciate that. And I do agree with Councilmember QB about making sure that any research or anything that we were already prior sort of working on, continues, and that we're not sort of starting from scratch here. I mean, I think a lot of exceptional work has been done on a lot of these issues, and we just need to kind of keep pushing forward here. With that said, Councilmember Adams.
Yes, I just didn't know if you needed consensus on this or not, Mayor Woods, but I'm supportive also of continuing to move forward with it.
Okay. Do I have one more for consensus?
This is Councilmember Garland. I am in consensus with everybody else.
Done.
Done.
Right.
Thanks, Mayor.
Or should I say, Councilmember Doreen?
Whichever's easier to say, obviously.
They are both very easy, Councilmember Garland. All right. Next up here, item number 5, mayor's announcements and city manager's announcements. I don't have any announcements this evening. Mr. City Manager, do you have any announcements?
No announcements. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, then we are adjourned at 7:03 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.